All right. Hope you're well. Hope you have your notebooks out. I'm most afraid to enter this particular call. We are in a long training, and in this, we're asking not the simple questions. The big questions are also like the long questions. Long questions are the ones that take a long time to ask, and they also take a long time to answer. Sometimes we like the simple questions, you can just say a word or move your body, and it's like really quick. But there's a reason why we are in conversation for a year. And you are in conversation with many energies and many people yourself. So right now, what we are doing is we're putting many concepts, many ideas in the body. We're bringing many push buttons, is what I sometimes call it. They're little switches, and it could be nonstop when we talk about, okay, what happens if I switch this on? If I poke that part of the body, that part of the brain gets activated, what if I make that sound? I think more and more what we're interested in, especially when we're introducing, is what are the push buttons that coordinate all the other push buttons? So inner dance is more a conglomerate of the many switches. That's actually just a few switches. And we're going to be going into that, maybe asking the question, what does it really mean to integrate? Maybe one way of looking at that is, how do I integrate the many systems that's all a part of me, like part of you, part of all of us, that's quite structural, hidden, and complex. So we have a choice now whether we become aware of what we are, or we can simplify and not have to know. It's pretty much, okay, I'm just going to feel my way through. So what makes this grouping special is that we are surrounded by people who are interested in themselves, but more so because inner dance is on the story of not just the change of the person, but the evolution of the human. Then what we're interested in is how it's the human being transforming as a species, as a culture. And when I say transformation, it's actually quite fast transformation. So we're going to be taking up, let's go ahead and review certain things that we have taken up, like in the last month, especially. It's been quite a loaded last month. We went into the autonomic nervous system, introduced that a little bit. We went into the sleep-wake cycle. I'm sure that has triggered many thoughts and interesting feelings, directions that might go somewhere. We opened up certain elements regards the limbic system, which is about emotions. And then we've opened up certain elements regarding the prefrontal cortex, or wake state is about becoming conscious, so that a lot of what happens in sleep, it's happening, but we're not conscious of it. So we're becoming more and more aware of what it means to become unconsciously conscious, where there's a lot of consciousness happening beyond our consciousness, and the unconscious is like sneaking its way into the conscious. We were speaking about how sleep is beginning to venture into wake. So the body is the teacher. The body has so much to speak. And for those who are in deep study, you're on the way to bringing this to world systems, to institutions, to global structures. You are on the way to being able to explain this both in a bizarre, weird, intuitive way, but also in a structured, organized, intelligent way. And you make your way through. You're gonna take like weeks, months, years to to not just take the information in. It's to embody. It's like you're a hacker. Let's say you're a hacker, you're hacking the system. Okay, just yeah, we're recording. Oh wait, we need to stop the share. We're recording, yeah? Yes, we are. All right, so number one, as a teaching note, we're gonna go into some anatomical elements. Like I love anatomy. Anatomy speaks about positions in the body, like where is it located. When there's a lack of anatomy, sometimes it's actually hard to picture. So there's something in the evolution of the visual cortex, the eyes, our ability to work with images that allows us as well to structure. That before we learn to look at things in an organizable way, we weren't really living within structure. So when we learn anatomy of the mind, not just the body, anatomy of the brain, anatomy of the sound, anatomy in the music, it actually helps us to map things out. And there's a really huge big picture understanding when we start to look at the anatomical position. So today, love to look at the anatomical positions of fear, of memory, of trauma, of self-awareness, of energy. We're going to be asking really big questions today. We're going to be asking long questions. Questions mostly you didn't even know you were asking, but when you were in the space, the questions were there, and the part of you was like demanding, like, there's more here. There's like so much more. Please slow down so that I can look at all the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. Whether it be in energy or in language, please give me more context as to how I operate. Like, what is causation to me? Like, what determines anxiety or worrying or not feeling well in the morning, or a certain dream that I had in the evening, or how a mother becomes a better mother or a father becomes a better father, but also how do people become aggressive. Now, what is scary about some of the topics that we're about to enter is there's a lot of paradox. There's a lot of contradiction. One of the reasons why we're quite confused about this is the body is really paradoxical. It's pure contradiction. Like the body doesn't like simplicity. The way we're wired, there are these weird connections that even I start to scratch my head. Like, really? Like, wait a minute. So I'm interested in the wirings, just like you are probably, but I'm also interested in how are we rewiring the central and the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so as to my normal practice, we're gonna move to the screen, and every time you notice that I seem to be writing something and like nothing's happening, then that means that you need to tell me that I'm spacing out without you actually seeing what I'm working on. All right, so let's make a new note just to work on an outline. I have quite a lot of notes. Okay, let's see. I think I work with the brush. Let's as always, let's start with questions. What are the questions we're asking? Maybe we could focus on two today. Like this is a common one. What does it mean to activate? What does activation really mean? And if you're gonna have a real conversation about the brain, this is going to come up because there's neural activation. There's activation of electricity and magnetism. The other thing that I would like to talk about is like time. I posted like a sharing in some of the groups regarding what is time. And I want you to experiment with this more and more, that when you hold sessions, you can ask these interesting inquiries. Like, this is what I ask, like, what is time? You know, when people are in it, they're laying down, I would ask them, okay, what is time? And that question does something. You know, I'm not just dependent on the music. I don't need the music. If I didn't have music, I have a lot of tools to my at my disposal. And questions for me are one of the most powerful and profound containers for the experience. I why do I ask that question? Like, it's quite a silly question to ask. Like, why would you ask that, Pi? What is time? It, you know, like, are people gonna look at their wrist? You know, like, I'm probably not asking what time is it right now. I'm probably asking what is the nature of time. And I have a reason for doing that, and it has something to do with maybe this. Okay. It has something to do, oops, it, it's not moving there. It has something to do with these areas that when we do the inner dance in the normal or basic way, what actually happens is we destroy time. That's one of the possibilities. Because where we normally go is this thing right here. So I asked the words, what is time, in order to activate that which is normally deactivated when people go into space. And you could talk about inner space, outer space, um, or the space. So right now we're asking, what does it mean to hold a space? Then you can also ask, what does it mean to hold the time? If you're going to ask, what does it mean to hold the space? In many cultures, space is also time. So there are many cultures where in the energy, history would come up, and it doesn't need to be personal history. Like in Asia, a lot of people, when they lay down, they visit the ancestors. There's something about honoring where we had come from. You go to South America, probably you would go into the ancestral. Some parts of Europe, it's the same. But normally in many sessions, the story is the first to suffer. The first thing we say goodbye to is the story, and it almost becomes the point. Like many facilitators are pretty much like, you need to stop thinking, and you need to stop asking questions, and just need to lay down and just not expect. So when you do begin the journey from space back to time, time becomes an interesting construct. And for me, it's huge philosophy. It's like a really interesting, um, it's a really interesting place to enter into. So let's go ahead, slowly look at where's time in the brain, where's space in the brain. Okay, let's begin with maybe basic notions. If we were going to study the brain, all right, what part would we start out with? Because the brain unto itself is quite complex. Sorry, I wasn't ready to let go of this one. The brain is just super complex. That when you study it, okay, do you start with like the cerebellum, start with the pons? We looked at the pons last week. Remember, like, this is part of the brain that paralyzes you before you go into REM state. The pons is also responsible for your breathing patterns. This is the medulla oblongata. This is the brainstem in general. And when we talk about certain neurotransmitters, we're going to be revisiting the ventral tegmental area. So if you remember the conversations regarding dopamine, I think we ought to go back to dopamine, but within much larger structures. Let's understand dopamine more, and not just think that dopamine is a drug that's like dope, like inner dope. Um, then we would study the whole cortex, this gray outer layer. the neocortex or the cortical regions. And then we would be going quite deep into the subcortical, like underneath the cortex, and we can't see it right now. So let's just say we are imagining we're peeling away this gray area underneath that would be the subcortical regions. So in all those, say the brainstem, the subcortical regions, the neocortex, there are secrets hiding that could be very, very powerful and useful for facilitators, healers, space holders. And what would be important here is we're not studying general neuroscience. What we're studying is neuroscience for inner dance facilitators, or space holders who are conducting similar work as inner dance. So this is what we're doing. So if we were to come up with a starting point, I would say the culprit, the villain, the bad guy, the one to blame that often comes up in discussions and studies would be the corpus callosum. Let's begin by studying what the corpus callosum is, what it does, and why is it so important in the construct. Like as a starting point, this is the first activation. If it's not the first, it's the one that lasts. That if you do general sessions, this is what you're going to fire up. So let's go ahead and look at the corpus callosum. Normally we go into this particular app just to study what it looks like. And it just looks so intense every time I press upon it, comparing it to the other. These are basically white matter structures of the brain. They are tracts, which are also bundles of nerve axons. So when you activate people, you're basically just allowing information to pass through the brain, which by nature is electromagnetic, and it carries information. Sometimes the manifestations may be emotional, may be insight, but on a basic level, it's light, it's energy, it's information. So the corpus callosum is easy to interconnect with the work that we do. Why? Let's go back to the screen for that, because we're doing anatomy, and I think it's important to just imagine things really well. Sometimes in the written word, the corpus callosum is implicated in epilepsy. So I think it's called a I forget the word, but we cut the corpus callosum if the epileptic seizures become dangerous for the epileptic. Because the activation, I would say the question on activation is very much to do with the nerve tracts in general, but specifically the corpus callosum is implicated much so. The one of the main roles of the corpus callosum is it allows the communication to happen between the hemispheres. Without a corpus callosum, communication between the left and the right would not be impossible, but it would be hard. So if you want to integrate, it's this middle space here. That's the corpus callosum. Maybe this is how you might draw it. Okay, it's that is what it does. That is what it looks like, and then that would interconnect with the other either nuclei or groups of cells in the brain or other nerve tracts as well. So when we conduct the epileptic seizures that come up in the inner dance and what people like to call the Kundalini rising, what does it do? Okay, so there could be like a general epilepsy, and I would say general because many people share the same types of journeys. We are studying other types of epilepsy, like more focalized epilepsy, whereby we can actually like determine where the activations are taking place. Like which part would I wish to activate, whether it be subcortical or neocortical. Um, okay, I prepared like another slide that's a little bit easier to use. So, okay, let's use this brain part. So this is just so I didn't have to write things down, I pre-drew or pre-wrote them. This is what I love about iPad. It helps you to do some really cool things. Corpus callosum, let's say, might be a little bit here. It would probably be lower, but for the sake of mapping things out in relationality with other structures, let's start with this. Because it's so major, let's resize it. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so I guess one of the first questions would be if I am doing this thing with music and there's a way in which you just ask people to lay down, the corpus callosum could easily light up. It's not difficult to light up the corpus callosum. Now, in many cases, there are many reasons why you would not want to light up the corpus callosum in the same way it lights up in epilepsy and inner dance. And that would probably be when you're learning, when you're trying to focus. If you're trying to focus and your corpus callosum lights up too much, you will not be able to stay coherent. You would just blow up into the stratosphere and we would lose you. You would go out of time, which is often what happens to epileptics, because after epilepsy, there would be aphasia, there would be losing of consciousness. It's not really just about the seizures, it's about the brain state. So the question is, okay, if you know how to activate the corpus callosum, then what? Let's go look at another version of the corpus callosum. Okay, so let's do this path thing. Okay, so this is the side of the brain. Let's go ahead and look for the corpus callosum. Wait, let me reset everything. All right. Let's take this out. I don't think we need the ventricles. So it's this guy right here. It's this is to blame for all those explosions that are happening in people's bodies that then lead to like this one right here. That's like an epileptic seizure. Let's spend some time today looking at why does that even happen at all. The corpus callosum would be one of the basic examples, but there would be other explanations for why does the body do that. But that's how powerful electricity is. So light up the corpus callosum. It looks quite tame and like friendly here, but then when you go back to this, it looks pretty wild. Like that's how much communication is happening all across the cortical regions. And also there's a lot of subcortical regions that are touched upon by that explosive flow that takes place to the CC or the corpus callosum. And so, yeah, we want to make sense of that. Now, going back to wait, let me go back to my screen just so we could do a more simple mapping. That's not so, I don't like to use these apps always because it's, there's so much images there. Now, I want to first talk about the cingulate gyrus. We're going to be bringing it up. It's very important for studying emotions. Now, okay, cingulate gyrus, what does it do? There's the posterior and the anterior cingulate cortex. Anatomical position for those who are studying anatomy, when I say anterior, that means in front. And when I speak posterior, that usually means like it's at the back. Okay, so we need to study all these things together because the words anterior and posterior comes up in the hypothalamus, in the thalamus, and all over the place. You know, they just mean anatomical positions. So the cingulate gyrus is, yes, about emotion. It's also the main hub for the default mode network. Now, the default mode network, as we've spoken about it in the past, is the thinking without thinking. Okay, maybe you say thinking without thinking, TWT, whatever that means. It's when you're not planning things out, there's a lot of thinking that still takes place, and that sort of thinking is about thinking about the future, thinking about like what did I do wrong, what did I do right, and what is actually super interesting about the cingulate cortex is there's also like autobiographical information. Like you're constantly thinking about yourself when you're alone. Autobiography. This looks like an E, right? When you're thinking about yourself, it often means that your cingulate cortex is at work. And you can imagine why emotion plays a part in the default mode network. Elements where all the things that are hard to think about that you don't have space for, they just turn on whenever you have the idle time. Um, yeah. So the other aspect that could be interesting related to, what's already been talked about today is it's responsible for topographical memory. So when you are looking at anatomy, when you're studying anatomy, like where is that? Like in my body, in my mind, in my brain, you need to activate the cingulate gyrus or the cingulate cortex. Now, uh, this is then to say, right now we would be studying what oops, what parts of the brain do we activate, right? That was the question. But the thing is, when you do intense and extreme activation in certain parts, especially tracts like the corpus callosum, you actually have this tendency to deactivate certain other regions. And because the cingulate gyrus um, lies above the, no, sorry, wait. Um, size. Because the cingulate gyrus is up here. The corpus callosum extends within the cingulate gyrus, but at the same time, the cingulate gyrus is right there, just superior or above the cingulate cortex. When you fire up the corpus callosum with so much energy, what do you want to call it? Call it light, call it power, call it electricity, call it magnetism. When you turn it on, um, like one of the intentions of facilitators is to facilitate the cessation of thinking, like stop thinking, stop thinking, stop that autobiographical mess. So let's use a spiritual term, something either overused or something overly mysticized, like the ego death. One of the ways you can map out the ego death is when you light up the corpus callosum, you would also light up the cingulate gyrus, but in such a way that you would actually power it up so much that it could shut down or just get cleaned up. You could just wash out the cingulate gyrus, so a sort of ego death can happen. So it kind of helps when you look at this from an anatomical positioning because they're neighbors, like if you if you keep lighting up the kundalini, um not really naming it as just the corpus callosum, then you're going to like rock the neighborhood, and the next door neighbor is so you can see how that's useful already, that okay, if in the beginning one of my intentions is to, okay, we don't need this for now. Like we want the collective, we want the planet, we want this person to just be an energy, then it does pay to turn off the cingulate gyrus either every once in a while. I don't think it pays to totally turn off the cingulate gyrus, primarily because as it is the main default hub for the default mode network, then you might end up turning off the other sections of the default mode network, like the precuneus is important. I want to talk about it a little bit. The orbitofrontal gyrus uh, or cortex might be important. Let's not describe that yet. The precuneus is a very interesting part of the brain, and it's right there. It's right there, close um, to these two structures. They're probably somewhere. The precuneus is probably somewhere here, maybe a little bit medial or dorsal. Um, so why would we talk about this at all? Why is that important? Primarily because the precuneus, interestingly, is one of the only parts of the brain that shuts down, totally shuts down, or almost totally shuts down, is inactive when we enter REM state or slow wave sleep, which, as we know now, are sections in the playlist. Now, if we're shutting that down, we have to be interested. What does that even do? Okay, do I not need that when I'm dreaming? And if I'm going to recreate the dream time in the journey, if I accidentally turn that off as well, which naturally does happen on the way to the psychedelic state, why is it even important? Now, it's important. The precuneus is important for empathy. Namely, it allows us to understand what other people are thinking. And the absence of empathy is pretty much what leads to ego. It's pretty much, I don't need to understand what's happening in other people's minds. What matters is always like me, myself, and I. Number one is the most important. So building empathy is interesting so that even as we bring people into REM state and oops, and the slow wave sleep stages, there might be ways that we don't also like shut this down. Because one of the functions of the precuneus is actually like forgiveness as well, not just like understanding in a multidimensional way what other people are seeing. So this is just to point out that normally when we go into very, very intense processes, we shut off like these, like the cingulate gyrus shuts down either momentarily or maybe even long term. Social and moral judgments, like thinking about what's right and wrong, belongs to cingulate gyrus. And if that's going away, that means that there's a problem there. Precuneus can shut down as well, where lack of empathy. And you can imagine where in REM state there is a lack of empathy. We're not actually thinking about other people. When we are dreaming, it's all about we are the universe, and it's time that I just, explore myself. I don't care about others. But when you live in the world, the precuneus would be quite important. The orbitofrontal cortex or gyrus is important, and it's connected to the DMN. It's important for understanding what is appropriate, let's say, especially behaviors. Like, should I do this in public? So when you see a lot of people really experimenting with breaking down the rules, whether it be in the journey itself or after the journey, it's because the orbitofrontal gyrus is affected. We'll look at the anatomical position of that when we give up this screen momentarily. It allows us to compare past experiences. And the reason why I bring this up as important is for those who are working with jails or addiction programs. The orbitofrontal gyrus is actually reduced in volume in psychopaths and sociopaths. So you can see how this is also interrelated with empathy. Psychotic episodes are very much, like pretty much a loss of social awareness, so that people really don't care about the norms, the rules, the moralities of the world around them. So if we're going to work with children, work with people in jails, these are quite important. So you would try to maybe understand different ways of holding the energy that's more balanced. Okay, so let's go ahead and look for the precuneus and the orbital frontal. Okay, this is the corpus callosum, and the precuneus would have been somewhere here. This is the cingulate gyrus. And to look at the orbital frontal, it's a gyrus, but it's also called the cortex. It's down here. It's all the way down here. Okay, as many of you well know, this is the prefrontal cortex, and when you activate the kind of movements that happen in the inner dance, kundalini, something work, this is the motor cortex, whether it be the primary motor cortex or the premotor cortex. But a lot of our moral judgments and empathy, it's over here. It's over here. This is the precuneus. It's underneath. It's because it has something to do with our ability to think well in a social dimension. We have to protect this. Mostly the outer parts are cortical regions that are sensory related, like the visual cortex, the motor cortex, the auditory cortex, but like the empathic, loving, forgiveness elements, they're inside here. And as you can see, that would make it quite close, in fact, to the corpus callosum. Okay, so that's a starting point. I thought that this is maybe a good way to start to take notes. Now, I want to slowly approach a way in which we can handle complexity in the long term. So that, let's say, we handle questions months or years later, we can hold really good questions. And good questions are often structural questions. You really want to know about a certain type of like healing a certain type of disorder, whether it be mental, emotional, or physiological. If we're not going to generalize, how do we really arrive at the objective elements, especially if we're performing like a therapy? All right, so going back to the screen then, let's maybe clean this up for now. Right. Let's say I don't think we'll need the corpus callosum after this for now. Now that we have the anatomical positioning for it, let's go ahead and maybe let's erase the corp. No, sorry, that's the cingulate gyrus. We would still need that later on. We're not going to be talking about the precuneus, so we can just let that go. Okay, so let's look at the brain in general, and there are these really interesting parts here that comprises, we call them roles. You can call them, like, what do they do? What do they do? The thalamus might be responsible for sensations or sensory gating. It's part of the limbic system, but it also has responsibilities on motor control. So when your body is moving or feeling emotions, most likely the thalamus has something to do with those. So I would like to introduce the thalamus today in a way that you might be interested in it in the long term. We've already brought up the thalamus in the last, like 2 weeks ago when we were talking about sleep, that if you're going into like dream and you have to pass through non-REM 1 all the way to non-REM 3, there has to be somehow a shutting down of the bidirectional energy of the thalamus so that you're not, like sensing, you're not seeing things from the outside, you're not hearing sounds coming from the noisy city that you live in, or, like the train is like moving back and forth, and, you're not disturbed. You have to shut down the bidirectional capacities in which you're absorbing things in the world. So this is just to remind us on yeah, the septal area would be interesting to bring back. We talked about specifically the medial septal. If you remember, the septal area is responsible for theta waves, which allows us to establish memory. That without the theta waves, if you are lacking theta waves, maybe you damaged your septal area. If you're lacking theta waves, this is when some kind of chaos would ensue. Theta are waves slower than alpha or beta or gamma, and this helps with even like the gating of sensations, so that you can associate them together. You can build thoughts. You can concentrate. So theta allows you to focus. It also allows you to remember. And I think if we were to study music, um, like the types of music that you choose would allow for theta to start holding the space alongside gamma, beta, alpha, and maybe even delta. So theta holds the power of organization that brings order, I would say, to the chaos. Um, it's like a middle space that negotiates delta and gamma in a way. So the septal area is where that initially takes place. Like a lot of the signals come from the septal area. Now, the most important topic that I would bring up today and in many of the future Zoom calls is the hypothalamus. Now, what is the hypothalamus? I would use metaphors for now. The thalamus would be, let's say, I would call it the policeman. It's like the traffic cop. Um, More specifically, the traffic policeman. And you know what traffic policemen do? Say you had like two roads and you had like a whole bunch of cars lined up. You need a way to organize the flow. If it wasn't a traffic policeman, the thalamus probably would be like a telephone operator or a switchboard operator, or any metaphor that helps you to imagine a gating mechanism. That's what the thalamus does. So when you add hypo to thalamus, hypo means underneath the thalamus. That's where it is. That's the anatomical position. Now, the hypothalamus is probably the most important um, piece of brain in the inner dance process. Why is that? Like it coordinates the autonomic nervous system. And if we were to talk about fear and trust, the hypothalamus coordinates whether you're going to fight, to run away, or to decide to trust or to rest. Are you going to love, or are you going to like punch someone in the face? A lot of what happens in the hypothalamus, remember what I said about multiple switch buttons? The hypothalamus simplifies that by organizing multitudes of switch buttons, especially to do with the autonomic, like automatic intelligence, the intelligence that acts on its own wisdom or accord without you having to think about things. Now, the hypothalamus is also very much implicated in the limbic system, which is all about emotions. And then the hypothalamus also organizes the endocrine system. So the autonomic nervous system handles very quick, fast operations. And the endocrine handles the slow operations. And so the limbic would be the bridge between the fast and the slow. The emotional limbic system tries to mediate electricity and chemistry so that when change happens, you have access both to fast and slow. So to simplify this, the hypothalamus is the executive governor in many ways of the brain. So if you learn how, oops, what kind of spelling is that? If you learn how to govern the executive governor, what power comes to you is you can learn to govern everything else is governing, like all the smaller push buttons. You learn, okay, what's the big set of push buttons that handles all the small ones? You know, singular push buttons can handle multiple switch buttons. And so even if you study a little bit of this, you're studying quite a lot in representation. So you don't need to memorize the whole brain part. Just studying the hypothalamus will give you that. Now, as you well know, hippocampus is about memory, and the entorhinal cortex is a neighbor of the hippocampus. It's in the parahippocampal gyrus, and it's also responsible for memory, mapping memory, most especially. As we well know, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for attention. It's just a bit thought in general there. And the amygdala is emotion. So this is quite a messy mapping, but that's okay. We're going to be bringing these up again today, just so you familiarize that every time you bring up the thalamus, okay, that's the traffic cop, septal area. That is the one that sends out the theta waves that then allows the hippocampus, which is the memory area. So we can coordinate memory. We could sequence memory. Sequence episodic memory means sequencing events, that this happened before that happened and that this thing happened afterwards. It's the theta that allows that. So the septal area is hugely important to assist the hippocampus with its tasks. Prefrontal cortex, I don't think we need to explain so much the PFC. A lot of you know what that does. And the entorhinal cortex, we're just putting in there. All right, so let's clean up. We can go back to redefining these later on. And you can ask questions later as well. Okay, didn't get that part. Could we go back to that part? I also would like to coordinate more study calls, like I don't know what we'll call it, but just for you to keep going back to a lot of these later on because we're learning certain complex elements. I don't mind going back to these again and again. Okay, so let's move a bunch of things into our dude, our guy. Let's make this bigger because the corpus callosum isn't there anymore. So let's move the thalamus over here. All right. Now, here's like the granddaddy. Oh, no, not that. It's more of this one. Let's bring it here. Yeah, I really love this app. It makes things so simple. It helps me to organize all my thoughts. Let's bring the hippocampus somewhere in this, like the subcortical. It's in the middle of the brain, midbrain. And the amygdala, probably here. So what we're learning here, and the reason why we're doing this is we want to understand how circuits work. The brain is basically like a gigantic circuit. And when you understand not just the parts, when you understand like connections, it could be rather helpful actually to map things out in your own head. Okay, that's what I'm doing when I get people to lay down and to close their eyes and when I touch them and so on and so forth. The entorhinal cortex would just be underneath the, okay, wait, let's make space. This is the hippocampus, and this is the entorhinal cortex. So I may as well, I thought I would just color everything just so later on when you're going back to this video, and I'm hoping you go back to this video because you will not be able to remember everything that's talked about in one go, then you can at least mix and match. You can also just draw arrows to where things are at. Okay, so through the course of our time together, we're going to be studying a whole bunch of circuits. A circuit is a relationality between various nuclei or brain regions, which are groups of cell bodies. These are really just cells grouped together, and they start to achieve a function or a role. And you learn your brain science, you learn what these do, and then you can learn the circuits. Because when you activate the simpler wanting to understand would be like, I'm activating these. So you just keep putting up certain songs that would activate emotions or memories and whatnot. But what you're really activating is, most of the time you'll activate all those anyway. Those are usually activated when you're sleeping and when you're awake. It's just that the types of activations change depending on the time of the day. But what you're really activating is a circuit. If you're activating all of them anyway, it's more of what am I activating? I'm activating a relationship. So I think the simplest way of tapping into circuitry and relationality in the inner dance would be, where do you begin? So let's say you're thinking about a sequence. A sequence is a series of events. So you have maybe number 1 going into number 2, going into number 3. Where do I start? So let's come up with 3 basic level categories in the experience. Say, okay, there's like energy involved. Like a lot of people love energy, and it's all about that. For some people, maybe it's about emotion. Okay, there's quite a lot of that. So let's say for some people, who are more interested in trauma work. Okay, I want people to look at their childhood, could be memory, and maybe there's something else. Maybe it's knowledge or insight, like some deep understanding of what they were missing, some clarity, some illumination, right? So when we study the playlist, and the playlist is really just a sequence, you can study the sequence of songs, you can study the sequence of your intentions. Okay, maybe this is normative. Then, okay, in the beginning, people feel the energy. It's like moving through their body, and then an emotion comes up, and then some kind of childhood memory, some episodic memory comes up, and then something clicks. Oh, okay, I understand now. That thing about my mom, that thing about my best friend, that thing about the bully, that trauma. Okay, it's starting to come together, but usually it's actually quite hard to start here. You have to start somewhere, and this is like a good way to start. So when you think about a playlist, then that's one way, rather than just, okay, I put song number 1, 2, 3, 4. These are songs, for example. Song number 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not just the songs, it's actually the series of events upon which there might be starting points. So when you study the brain regions, you can also think of sequence in that way. Because when you do study the circuitries in the brain, there are inputs and outputs, and sometimes the inputs and outputs, which are, let's say, the arrows. So let's say there might be a relationship between, you remember the amygdala is kind of in red. This is emotions. So let's say I wanted to trigger homeostasis, or I wanted to trigger the, let's say, the autonomic nervous system. Let's say I want them to I want them to cry, or I want their body to move. I want them to go through a catharsis. I want like an epileptic seizure. I want their body to move. And a lot of that is more sympathetic nervous system based. Okay, so the sympathetic nervous system is not here. It would extend through from the brain stem. This is the cerebellum. It would then extend through the spine, right? And we will look at sorry, that's a little bit, no one has a spine that's that thick. It would curve through the cranial, thoracolumbar, and sacral regions. That's the autonomic nervous system is here in the peripheral nervous system. When you look up here, this is the central nervous, this is the brain. The peripheral nervous system extends as the system of nerves that go further from the spine all the way to the rest of the body. If I wanted to activate that, then a sequence would be, where do I start? When I study what I do, am I very emotional driven? Do I like emotional songs? But you're sequencing, right? So in the beginning, you would be starting off slow. So let's say, okay, I want to start with activating the corpus callosum because the two hemispheres aren't talking to each other. So remember, like we use blue and it's over here. This is the corpus callosum. So then who activates who is what I'm saying. It could be more complex than that, basically many regions activate each other. But if you wanted to simplify, that is an option too. Whereas it's actually possible to look at where do initial activations begin. So let's say we were just to focus today on one circuit. Okay, let's give an example of a circuit. And there are many circuits, a lot of which are interesting. These really belong to your work. Now, I never know how to pronounce this because often when I watch videos on it, some people call it the Pepe circuit. Some people call it the Papes circuit. Okay, so let's describe the Pape circuit because this is one circuit that's often activated in the inner dance process. So the Pape circuit could begin with where messages in the hippocampus, there would be a connection between the hippocampus is oh wait, it's the wrong color. This is the okay, this is the hippocampus. So actually the amygdala, let's bring that above. Got confused there. This is the hippocampus. This is the amygdala, and this is the hippocampus, which is above the entorhinal cortex. So how a circuit could be formed would be, okay, like there could be a circuit that leaves the memory center. So remember, the hippocampus is memory, and it would begin to communicate with different brain regions. So there would be a very long circuit that would affect number one, like this thing right here. This is called the septal area. So remember the part of the brain that sends out theta frequencies that helps to coordinate the hippocampus memory functions to be able to sequence events. Now the circuit would then travel all the way here into the hypothalamus, particularly like at the base of the hypothalamus, you have this area called the mammillary. And this will come up again and again. The mammillary bodies is the part of the hypothalamus. You remember the hypothalamus is the executive governor. Almost every autonomic, limbic, and endocrine function is mapped out somewhere in the hypothalamus. The mammillary bodies in the hypothalamus manages memory. And so it must be part of that circuit. So there is a part of that circuit that travels to the hypothalamus. And then from there, there would be a travel all the way to the thalamus. This is the thalamus. And then the energy then, or the circuit would travel to the cingulate cortex, and then the circuit would then travel all the way to the entorhinal cortex, and the entorhinal cortex would then connect to the hippocampus. So what is beautiful about the PAPE circuit is that it's a closed circuit. It's one of the most efficient circuits in the brain. And there could then be a connection between the thalamus and the frontal cortex within this particular system, so that the mind, the thinking process, can then access memory functions in a certain way. Now, okay, what are we trying to show here? Let's talk about inner dance. And please don't get overwhelmed by all this information, because we're going to keep going back to these once we introduce them. We have to practice. When you bring about the inner dance, one of the things that initially goes away is memory. Okay, I'm just helping you to think things out well in terms of affect and effect. That when you fire up the corpus callosum, because then that would affect the remember this green structure here is the cingulate cortex. Then when we start to forget the self, then the self starts to forget memories. That kind of goes away. A lot of the activations, or the so-called activations, are doing stuff in terms of all these subcortical regions that do normal management of, okay, do you feel good? Okay, do you feel okay? Okay, are you sensing the world in a stable way? When you blow things up in the inner dance kundalini something, you would then be conducting this kind of work, this electricity work. You're like an electrician. You're doing all these things with people's brains. And when this is described more and more, then you would understand, okay, if I do that, then how would that connect with the autonomic nervous system? Remembering, okay, there's the brainstem, the cerebellum, and then you have the spine. All of these would, from simple explanations, then start to account for fear, start to account for aggression, start to account for love, trust, and so on and so forth. All these basic questions that you might have would meet the long questions. Short answers would lead to long answers. So what we're posturing here is how ego initially dies. The PAPE circuit, which is a closed circuit, is a circuit that you overrun or override as a starting point. But then, as you remember, when you sequence things, starting with energy, and then because let's say the amygdala handles emotions, and then emotions then lead to memory, and then memory then leads to like insight, right? Then you're understanding the sequence, that when I start with, let's say, normally what you start out with is actually the thalamus. Like the thalamus has nuclei that gates, let's say, sound. So when you expose people to sound, you remember the thalamus is the traffic cop or the telephone operator. If there's like a buildup of cars, or if there's like like the thalamus makes sure that you don't get overwhelmed. So sound, like light, pain, taste, everything except for smell would need to pass through the thalamus. And initially, when people hear the sound, because of all these connections, because the thalamus is somehow still interconnected, there might be another circuit that connects the thalamus to the, oops, no, let's not make that one. Maybe the thalamus would be connected to the amygdala, because there is another circuit that connects the thalamus to the amygdala. You trigger the amygdala, you can then trigger the emotions. You trigger the emotions, then you can trigger the septal region, and you can trigger the autonomic nervous system, which handles fear, arousal, excitement, and also trust. Basically, what we're studying is how you can create all of these simultaneous co-activations so that, let's say, you have the power to arouse and excite, but you also have the power to slow down, to inhibit, to bring about rest or digest elements. So this is maybe a messy introduction for what will later on be something that get used to. That are you okay with the prospect that you can handle neuro conversations with doctors who are interested in how does inner dance help fear? Okay, because this is initially the way it works. Here's the mapping, and so that when we do bring up these words, we're not shutting down your cingulate cortex. You remember the cingulate cortex is important in topographical mapping, and we're helping you to just imagine for now, okay, this is the brain. That's, this is where things are at. They're not just sounds anymore. It can become more of concepts, like real concepts for you. Okay, so let's still work within the review. We have brought up certain terminologies that I would love to bring back again. We talked about dopamine in a previous call. We also brought up this interesting brain region called the ascending reticular activating system. If you don't know this, it means you didn't watch the previous month, the latter part of the month videos. And these had something to do with the release of serotonin, norepinephrine. I just want to keep mapping these out. Okay. Um, what else is there? I'm actually forgetting. There was the well, dopamine was one of them. Serotonin and acetylcholine is one. Okay. Now, before going too deep into that, let's just understand where is the ARAS, or the reticular activating system. It's over here, like in the brainstem. So I would love to study the brainstem with you in the short and long term. This is like supposedly the original brain, or the oldest brain, is the brainstem, the reptilian brain. Before then, we evolved into subcortical regions, and then the neocortex. So a lot of these chemicals then, which is to say, a lot of these chemicals are sent out through the brainstem. So if you remember, we spoke about this powerful place called the ventral tegmental area, the VTA. Let's just go ahead and write that. Okay, the VTA is very much responsible for like addiction. So if you were to bring up addiction slowly, we would want to understand when you use the music, when you use touch, when you ask people to lay down, when you use words, when you bring context to the space, what is happening to the addictive pathways, the dopaminergic pathways. How are you getting people addicted, or how are you releasing addiction? So that's in the brainstem, and it would still bring, coordinate with the rest of the brain. There would still be relationships there. Now these are basics. I want to talk about non-basic things that would answer certain questions to do with time. Okay, now that we brought that up, let's go back to what are we trying to understand anyway? Okay, there's something about time, love, fear, anger. That's circuitry by nature. What else questions would be we asked? In relation to time, we're going to be talking about speed, because when you bring people into the experience, you actually heighten or increase velocity of how certain chemicals are sent to these brain parts that then make brains and bodies explode. There are certain formulas that will really blow your mind in understanding them, and I want to go over those today. Now, one of the things that I'm very interested in is in the explanation that love is actually a kind of fear. All right. And when you start to understand the sections of the brain that activate love, you would be surprised at the fact that they're the same sections that activate fear, and they're also the same areas that activate like anger. They're all together. So too much love actually can bring about fear, and a lot of fear will then lead to anger. And if you don't understand like this middle space that understands balance, like it's this middle space that we want to map out, not just these three, but what is like balance. Um, and if you really want to understand that, anatomical and physiological, biological mappings would really, really be helpful. Okay, so just wanted to start with that. Okay, so wait, are we done with this? Just reviewing dopamine. Dopamine, okay, let's take our time, but dopamine we will explain as to why do people explode? What is the nature of some of those super powerful experiences when the body just explodes like a bomb, like a nuclear power plant? Okay, dopamine is responsible for that. Love and fear and all that is also important. Okay, so I think to to not make this so heavy, let's now go to the executive, the big boss, the governor, the executive governor, the hypothalamus. Let's study the hypothalamus. In the beginning, simple. Later on, not so simple. Because they would simplify things because it's a starting point. So remember, the hypothalamus has three functions, one of which is the autonomic nervous system. And for that, we would study the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight. Let's just put fear. And then we would study, let's make it a little bit cool, like the parasympathetic nervous system, which is, say, rest. We could put trust, but for now, we'll put rest. So let's say that's the first function of the hypothalamus. The second function would be it assists the limbic system, which, as you well know, is emotional. And then the third function, if you remember it, is endocrine function. Okay, I'm going to scare you a little bit by showing you what the hypothalamus looks like. So this is a tool that I use for presentations when I conduct trainings. It's a Prezi. And just so I kind of map out or know where things are at, then, like I can give you a link to this later on. Well, we mentioned, for example, the mammillary bodies. So that's a part of the hypothalamus that assists with memory and also emotion. During our last calls, we looked at the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the part of the brain that is sensitive to light, and it is what communicates to the pineal gland to release melatonin, which is responsible for the dream state or maintaining our body clock and circadian rhythm. So that's also a part of the hypothalamus. Now, I think one basic starting point is to understand that if you were to study the autonomic nervous system, let's say, okay, that's already quite interesting. Okay, I want to study the autonomic nervous system. I want to understand the regions for fear. So in previous videos or trainings, you hear me speak about how fear, the outflows of fear and excitation extends from thoracic 1 to lumbar 2. So from T1 to L2, this is where excitement and fear and fighting would extend from. There are four cranial nerves that handle the parasympathetic nervous system here and down here in the sacrum. So the co-activation of that is something that would be we would be studying. That doesn't stop here at the spine. It extends throughout the whole body, extending to the, especially like the heart. Let's study the heart today and understand what is it that determines time in the heart. You know, what is the pacemaker of the heart, and what does that have to do with the hypothalamus? It's a grand mapping of that. So before you study that, we would ask, okay, if I am beginning to understand the anatomy and the extensions, the functions of fear and trust, fast and slow, the question still is, what manages all of that? Okay, now where were we? Okay, let's go back to this one right here. Now, the posterior is the back. So at the back of the hypothalamus, you would see that the sympathetic nervous system is being regulated. Pupillary dilation, blood pressure elevation, these are sympathetic nervous system manifestations. So you want people to explode, to confront their deepest fear. You would learn to trigger the posterior hypothalamus. Remember, a nucleus is merely a group of cell bodies. Now, the anterior would be the front of the hypothalamus. So say you're interested in rest and trust and slowing down, then you would trigger the anterior nucleus of the hypothalamus. And that's where the parasympathetic nervous system is activated. This is where it's located, and then this is where it's activated. All right. So we could easily look at that like in the future. We actually touched upon that a little bit in the past videos when we talked about sleep and wake. Okay, like here, yes, this could lead to sleep, but this would be a precursor in a way to relax the body. Then you can let them to dream. The only thing I am pointing out to you is that almost all of your automatic functions are mapped out in the hypothalamus: autonomic, endocrine, limbic. A very, very small part of the brain coordinates like all of the functions and the manifestations that would come up in life, in sleep, and in the journeys that happen in a very, very intense way. So if you fire up a body, this is technically what's governing all of those explosions that are happening. All these regions, all these nuclei map out, all the functions of these. And this is almost like everything that's not to do with thinking, like anything that's subconscious, that's automatic, that handles the complexity. So one of the things that we would look at today is oxytocin and vasopressin, responsible for love and anxiety. There's another part of the hypothalamus that produces and releases those. This is another one, the supraoptic nucleus. Another one that I would like to bring up today, and please stay with me on the complexity of these, because we will map them out. We will define what they mean. The lateral hypothalamus is responsible for hunger. You remember orexin or hypocretin that came up in the previous calls. If you want to wake up, you send that out, but it also comes with hunger. So there's a reason why you're hungry while you're awake. It's because the same part of the brain that wakes you up is also that which makes you hungry. Now, if you have a region that coordinates hunger, you also have a region that coordinates fullness or satiety. Okay, this is when, okay, this shouldn't be here. Satiety is pretty much, okay, I'm okay right now. I am beautiful, I'm fine, but something I'd like to trigger inside you is that when you also trigger this part of the brain, current new research is finding out that aggression and fear also comes out of there. And it's a very fine line, what is like satiation, satisfaction, and uh, anger, especially aggression and even savage behavior. So if you activate certain areas a little bit too much, that is going to show up like hypersexuality, um, like aggression, temper, and so on and so forth. So I want to understand these with you. Here's a definitive starting point. Let's start with oxytocin. Oxytocin projected into the VTA for this, but here it's oxytocin in general across the whole body. Okay, so I want to show you something obvious. Now, when the body starts moving like this looks more like a Kundalini kind of movement, which is also epilepsy, as it's defined by a lot of people. But I would look more at the myoclonic movements that are happening here. Now, when the body starts to move in this way, now that we talked about anatomy, what parts of the brain is being activated? Now, I would rather actually have chosen that this was a woman, okay, that this wasn't a guy, because okay, this should like maybe almost shock you if I bring this up, and I've just been waiting for the right time to bring this up. Now, okay, we're talking about the hypothalamus, and as you well know, oxytocin is endocrinal. It's an endocrine hormone, oxytocin. Okay. Now, what is the primary functions? Are the primary functions of oxytocin? Now, people say it's like the love hormone. It's the groovy hormone. It helps you to bond
Hey,
with.
Pai, nothing is being shown.
Thank you to the super helpful, responsible voices, simultaneous ones. Okay, so oxytocin is love, 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 love. But have you ever thought about the fact that oxytocin is primarily responsible for uterine contractions? Meaning when a woman is giving birth, um, oxytocin allows for the contractions to happen. And this could also take place in menstruation periods. But I want to point out that there are uterine contractions that can happen because of oxytocin release that have nothing to do with birth and that have nothing to do with menstruation. So I would like you to understand when people's bodies start to go weird like that, like start to move like in a weird way, uh, because oxytocin is also the hormone for trust. That when you open the space, and you allow people to trust because they're safe, they're safe. When you then release or even like increase the production of oxytocin and release it, you can actually bring about a literal birth, or at least the experience of giving birth. And there is oxytocin in men just as there are in women, but in men there are different formulations of oxytocin. So we would think about different um, hormones. That's the counterpart for men. All right. So already that should interest you, that when you release oxytocin, that is one of the reasons why the body does that, like literally. It's because oxytocin is meant to do that. That's the primary reason for or primary function for oxytocin. It's a signaling mechanism that, okay, we need to keep the species alive. We need to now push out the baby. Okay. And then later on, it developed multiple functions or purposivity. Now it's also what allows for love to happen. But to be honest with you, oxytocin was the kind of love that was conditional, and they were evolutionarily created or designed to allow the mother to focus on loving, especially her children, so that when oxytocin levels are high in women, they may actually become quite aggressive to people who are not their children. So women who are in the early stages of motherhood, sometimes there's an imbalance there where there's levels of anxiety, and because when oxytocin levels do go high, and this is not balanced out by other neurotransmitters and hormones that would help to inhibit, oxytocin is now being understood to also have a tertiary or quaternary function of aggression and anxiety. So don't fall in love too much with the love hormone. It's actually designed to create aggression to those who are not your kin, people who don't belong to your bubble, your tribe, your group. So it can bring about like a certain level of distrust in people. Already, that's quite interesting. Understand that hormone, because when you do bring people into trust, they will release that hormone. But if you trigger that too much, it's normally not oxytocin alone. Okay, and we will explain this, how it's still connected to the hypothalamus. There's another hormone that needs to mix with oxytocin that would bring about those levels of like aggression, and this would be estrogen. When estrogen meets oxytocin, and estrogen is important in the reproductive system of women, um, oxy- oxytocin and estrogen levels like combined then would lead to the thing that is not trust, that's still implicated with oxytocin. Now, I want to go to men now. Okay, though men don't have um, the same uterine contractions as women, I want you to notice that. Just watch the bodies. Are the movements of men the same as in women? Not exactly. And there's a reason why most rooms are filled with women when it comes to inner dance work that we do, whatever you call it. So in men, there's another hormone. Let's look at another color, the color baby boys have. So vasopressin is the men's version of oxytocin. So that in men who become good dads, there are healthy, abundant releases of vasopressin. And in men who are not good dads, vasopressin levels are low. Now, just to keep learning, the other name for vasopressin is anti-diuretic hormone. And if you don't want to keep writing that down or saying it, you can just say ADH. Okay. So you might understand then that vasopressin is similar in relation to oxytocin, because we need to have something in men that conducts the same thing. Now, if oxytocin needs to meet with estrogen in order to bring about a shift from trust to aggression, trust to distrust, love to you don't belong to my tribe, and you're a stranger, I'm going to kill you. This is a tribal design, in a way. The masculine would need to have its own formula, and it would be vasopressin plus, and this is going to be easy for you to take into account. It's testosterone. Okay. Now, understanding that vasopressin and I remember like oxytocin are released in the same parts of the brain, namely in the uh, uh, supraoptic nucleus of the hypothalamus and the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus. Testosterone and estrogen are also influenced, not released, but influenced by the same hormone within a circular cycle that begins in the hypothalamus, and that's called the luteinizing hormone, or LH. You can just call it LH, right? Okay. It's a gonadotropin hormone, which means it has something to do with sexuality. So too much estrogen, too much testosterone, hypersexuality. Mix testosterone with vasopressin, what you have is aggression. Mix estrogen with oxytocin, what you get is also distrust and aggression in women. Oxytocin on its own in healthy amounts would be love, like bonding. And so I guess when men and women learn to love people who are outside of their tribe, oxytocin then needs to be retrained to release. But basically, um, men, men especially, but men and women, but men especially who have a hard time with monogamy, who are always looking for other women or men, it's actually still because of low oxytocin and low vasopressin levels. So vasopressin and oxytocin seem to have some kind of role that helps family structures to come by. So that if you were to observe people who are hypersexual or can't seem to stick with one partner, it's because of these formulations. It's just something to think about so that when you activate elements, okay, going back to bodies, for example, if you were to keep activating bodies like in a certain way for the sake of it, it's like, oh, okay, because they seem to be loving, they seem to be like powerful. When you keep pressing on certain areas of the bodies, and you know what testosterone can do. Now that you know what estrogen can also do alongside oxytocin, overly focusing on these parts of the body, and this would be the gonadic or gonadotropic part of the body, the sexual parts of the body. Too much orientation around the sexual areas without balancing that with the other regions and chemistries, then you will perceive possible problems like in the future. It is true that a lot of people are requiring bonding because they have not had it. So a healthy release in oxytocin will take care of, let's say, depressive states, lack of intimacy in people, lack of connection. I'm just saying that that alone will not be sufficient. So that's one element that I would like to bring up. That's structural in nature that then could help you to sequence elements in your playlisting and your workshop design so that okay, you might know certain songs that establish connection, bonding, trust, but then you shift it so it's not just going to be that like forever. Okay, so that's maybe one thing, and now maybe you're understanding what I meant by why did Pi say love is fear? It's because love for many people is actually fear that manifests as love, and it's conditional love. It's protective love. It's also love based on survival mechanisms, like Darwinistic love, which is yeah, like evolutionary love of having been on a very harsh planet. And it is true that most people will prioritize their kin, the people close to them, before they think about others. So when people transcend, they maybe reformulate these somehow, and that is happening in the processes for sure that we are conducting. Now, okay, let's go a little bit deeper, and this would still have to do with the endocrine system, but it would be a little bit less direct. It would be like an indirect system, but you will see how we would still interrelate back to the endocrine, I mean, the hypothalamus when we look at the formulation. So the formulation here would have something to do with the heart. Okay, let's leave the brain for now and let's go to the heart. Let's think about the heart. When you ask people to go into a state of surrender, you are touching their heart, and it's not like a shallow touching of the heart. You will affect their heart. Now, if you didn't want to just think of the heart from a figurative love, Hallmark card, Hollywood movie, feel good space, if you're going to affect the heart, let's understand the heart. Like, what is the heart really? Like, what does it do? And how is the music, how is touch, words affecting the heart? Um, so remember that one of our topics today has to do with time. Like, what is time? Now, if you affect the heart, let's say you drink too much coffee, your heart will be affected, then time is going to get affected. Drink too much booze, um, yeah, like let's say take cocaine or drink too much tequila, something's going to happen to time because the heartbeat will get affected. And we need to keep understanding what keeps time. So for some of you who attended like former or previous trainings, you probably remember that we had brought this up. The pacemaker of the heart is called the SA node. And then let's now just visualize or open the app that explains or shows the SA the SA node. Where's the heart? There's a heart. Yeah. Okay. Um, so SA stands for sinoatrial node. No, wait. Okay, so there's the SA node. So it's such a small piece. It's such a small area of the heart here in the ventricle that actually determines whether your heart is going to palpitate, is going to speed up, or is going to slow down. So this is quite far away from the hypothalamus. So how would you say that the hypothalamus is the executive governor of the sympathetic nervous system? Understanding that sympathetic nervous system is excitatory, is to do with arousal or activation, then this needs to interconnect with the hypothalamus somehow. Yeah. So let's go ahead and look at the hypothalamus. No, wait. Yeah, let's start with my screen first. This is rather important. Please keep focus on this one because it will explain again why some of the explosions. Now, let's say thinking about the chakra systems, right? Maybe this is the heart. And we've already talked about the gonads. No, let's since it's chakra based, let's color it up. This is the heart. Oops, don't do that. Go back. And then this is the gonads, the sexual area. Now, to really understand the workings of the heart, especially in the explosive element, we need to go to um, the middle, which is the, let's just color things up anyhow. Whatever red might be, just let it be there, just so we have relationality. We've already talked about the orange. Now we're interested in the green, like the heart. Okay, like the endocrine gland for the heart is the thymus. We don't need to talk about that today. That which is responsible for immunity. Sorry, there's this mosquito trying to like raise my heartbeat levels. We would need to bring up the yellow because the adrenal gland, let's make it bright yellow. The adrenal gland needs to interact with the heart or the green in order to let's say the point of many facilitators is I want them to break through. I want them to break free, to increase blood volume, glucose levels, to increase heart rate. Maybe their intention is I want them to have like some kind of heart attack. I want to keep raising the music and activating them and creating catharsis, make them cry, make them scream, make them shout. And there are a lot of these facilitators who keep like pressing on the belly. I used to do that, but I've not been doing that for a long time. And the ones that I used to do that to, they're not now doing it to other people because it has something to do with power. It helps them feel like powerful because there's a lot of energy there. But what is that power? It has something to do with the heart and something else altogether that I think let's draw something that's looking like the opposite of the heart. And for those of you who know what that is, It's what's on top of the kidneys, which is the renal organ. So it's the adrenal organ. It's the adrenal gland, right? Okay. So because the adrenal gland is part of the endocrine system, then you can still bring this back to the hypothalamus, because the hypothalamus is the executive governor of the endocrine system. It sends messages to the pituitary, which would be somewhat maybe here. Hypothalamus would send like messages to the pituitary, and the pituitary would then send messages all across the endocrine systems, the thyroid, the thymus, the adrenal. So if you wanted to trace like all that power, the adrenal is mostly responsible for power. Okay, let's map this out. I saw a picture synchronistically today that's maybe a little bit more helpful or easier to not have to draw it out. Okay, I don't think I see it, but I can just draw it if I don't see it. Over here, yeah. Okay, so this is the adrenal gland as I had just drawn. And you remember like we thought about the amygdala where there was a basolateral and the middle portion. It's the same with the adrenal gland. There's the cortex. The cortex is usually the covering and the medulla would be the middle. So a lot of you would be interested in this because cortisol is implicated in many of our discussions. What's normally called the stress hormone is also a source of power for a lot of people. Now, adrenaline is also much talked about, and noradrenaline is also quite important in stimulating the sympathetic nervous system. Now, understanding that cortisol is there to increase blood glucose levels. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid. Then, when you feel a lot of energy, it actually means that you're just increasing as well sugar in the blood, and then you're burning that, you're firing it up. Now, because we have studied, you remember this aspect of, let's say, oxytocin meets estrogen, and vasopressin or ADH meets plus testosterone equals like aggression, right? Like an explosion of emotion. Like let's say this is your actual goal. Like I want to, I think it lacks a G. I would like people to get in touch with their anger, which is somewhat related to power as well. Like you can do that, but a more direct and obvious way to do that has to do with this system that I'm speaking about. Like heart interrelates with the adrenal gland. So now that we've established where what do you call this? Cortisol is sent out, which is in the adrenal cortex, and in the medulla. No, sorry, the medulla. This is where you send out epinephrine. Let's just say adrenaline and noradrenaline. This has something to do with the increase in heartbeat. And let's describe why. So you remember the SA node is the pacemaker of the heart. All right. Now, normally what sets the pacing of the heartbeat is it's this one right here. Let's just grab it. And then let's just make some changes and let's move this down. Let's hope like this converts it well because you can't read my handwriting. The noradrenaline sent out from the medulla, okay, then would message to the SA node, okay, I want you to create this certain rhythm. It's all about rhythm, right? It's all about the beats per minute. And if it wasn't just really about the music that you're using, if you wanted to increase the rhythm, would you increase noradrenaline or norepinephrine? The answer is yes. But if you really wanted to break through, to explode, what actually needs to be done is from the cortex, you would then add on. It's cortisol plus noradrenaline that actually creates that overexpression of increased heart rate, increased glucose levels, and blood pressure as well. It's the energy hormone and the energy the neurotransmitter and hormone, like plus plus equals like some people might call it power, but an overexpression of that would be like stress, because when you have too much uh, sugar in your blood, like if you have high glucose levels, um, like in an extended period, then you're not going to feel good. Like we all know what that actually feels like. So this is one of the reasons why a lot of people would say, okay, I've attended these trainings, these sessions, and they're very life-changing and profound, but why is it that I feel like exhausted? Why do I feel exhausted for weeks later? Why do I feel depressed? It's because you have high cortisol levels. So you're experiencing power, but you're actually stressed out. Because if you are experiencing high cortisol levels, even while you're sleeping, that's when you're not entering REM states too deeply. And that's also when you're not accessing slow wave sleep very well. So if you're going to design sessions, going back to this guy, there's nothing wrong with power, just like there's nothing wrong with love, right? Just like there's nothing wrong with rhythm. But if you put a lot of these formulations together, that's way too much. You can see then, wow, this becomes like something else that's not love. And that'd be fear or aggression. This becomes stress. And then this just becomes a high blood pressure. Maybe because like you had so much to do and you needed to caffeinate and you needed to keep awake, and you haven't slept for a long time. So this is just to help you understand that there are certain practices that have become normative and popular in especially the Kundalini activation concept that's tapping into like these formulations. So if you wanted to give certain explanations to others as to why they are exhausted, and we did get that kind of question a couple of weeks ago from someone who had left the CAP um, universe and has stated that many people who have gone to trainings, they are actually feeling exhausted. I didn't have the space to give a proper answer, but this is the answer. It's because of to access power, it's also accessing stress. So to balance that out, we would need to understand what are the agonists to noradrenaline. It would be acetylcholine, okay, or it would be serotonin, or it would be GABA. It's not the stimulants that would be what people need by that time. They need to rest, they need to digest. And sometimes like short 3-day trainings, the effects can last for months, can last for weeks if we're not familiar. So we can always explain, oh, it's because we're going through an integration review process. But at the same time, when the trainings are quite balanced, people don't actually experience like stress levels. They're really just good. They're not reporting like exhaustion. So I really feel and have been observing for a long time now how a lot of space holders are pressing on bellies, especially when these contractions are happening. What they're doing is they're actually overexpressing both orange and yellow, which is separately testosterone meets ADH, oxytocin meets estrogen, and plus it's noradrenaline plus cortisol. Now, I'm not going to stop there. I want to just keep going at this. There are 4 formulations that I wanted. No, sorry. Before we stop, because we are, having to be responsible and needing to look at the connections between the adrenal gland and the hypothalamus. How does that actually relate? So you remember when it came to the Gonads, I talked about luteinizing hormone or LH that leads to estrogen production and testosterone in the ovaries and in the testes. Now, in the adrenal system, there has to be something that's coming from the hypothalamus that would then activate both cortisol and noradrenaline, and that's basically called corticotropin releasing hormone in the hypothalamus that would then release adrenocorticotropic hormone or ACTH, which would then lead to the production of cortisol and norepinephrine. So this might teach you, for those who are interested in executive governance of the body, that instead of pressing in the belly, you can just keep going back to the the executive governor. Like this is the one that's taking care of everything. And when there's, for example, people are harboring like fear, which we're now mapping in the hypothalamus, or aggression, you can then sense why the hypothalamus is having a hard time letting people to rest, you know? It's all about how we're programming, unprogramming, and reprogramming these elements, which the spiritual work is largely touching upon with very, very little awareness in those who are like supposedly changing people's lives. The question is like, how, you know, like exactly how are you changing these patterns? Now, let's look at another powerful instance wherein inner dance is utilizing certain. Okay, when you spell inner dance, it's always small letters, and then it's just one word, just to, if you are to use that in any of your expressions. It's not capital letters, and it's not like two words. It's a common noun. It doesn't have much you know, like it doesn't try to stand up or lord over other modalities. It's cross-modal and it's humble. So okay, what is the last example of a formulation that elevates the experience, that can be explosive but also unhealthy at times? Okay, let's not go to that. No judgments. Let's try to understand the explosion, the stimulatory function. Now okay, we would have to go back to dopamine. We explained, I don't know if you watched the first videos for the last month. Remember that we had spoken about the different dopamine pathways. There's the mesolimbic, whereby the amygdala and all things limbic, like emotional, would use dopamine activations in order to heighten emotions. Okay. Um, and then the next one was mesocortical. Just keep reviewing the videos if you want to go back to that. This is dopamine as it communicates with the prefrontal cortex, especially the dorsolateral. So when you have healthy dopamine release, then you're able to focus. And when that's problematic, then something goes wrong with your attention levels. You have ADD or ADHD. You remember the tubero, like infundibular? And then we talked about prolactin levels in relation to psychosis or schizophrenia, right? There was that really beautiful, weird conversations with the Singaporeans on psychosis, and we brought about dopamine inhibits prolactin, and when there's not enough prolactin, it could lead to psychosis. But if it's too much prolactin, let's just write that down, prolactin, then it could also lead to certain mental disorders or manifestations. Now, I don't want to talk about these three. What I wanted to talk about, which we didn't cover, and now it's just time to cover that, is the nigrostriatal pathway. Now, this is a lot more inner dance, and this is going to be paradoxical. The nigrostriatal pathway, if done in a certain way, can break addiction, but it can also create more addiction. So I wanted to bring up first the formulations of oxytocin plus estrogen, testosterone, ADH, and norepinephrine and cortisol for you to understand this well. Okay, now, do you remember terminology? Wait, let's make some space. This is taking too much. Remember part of the brain that is interesting, that when it receives dopamine, then some kind of explosion would take place. Okay, like you would fire up the autonomic nervous system, that the body would just explode, often in some kind of spontaneous movement. This can explain inner dance. So we explained how when you send dopamine, sometimes rerouting, sometimes you don't need to reroute. You would just increase the amounts of dopamine sent to the striatum. And we will explain what is the striatum or the striatum. And it's a nigrostriatal pathway that handles the striatum. Okay, now I used to think that the striatum was a spiritual doorway of the brain. In a sense, because it allows for the activation of the basal ganglia, which is the reptilian brain. You want to go into instinct, you want to move like an animal, you want to go primeval, you want to go into your dinosaur archetype or your, like a gorilla archetype. You activate the basal ganglia, one of the candidates for the old brain. So how are we able to do that? Do you remember that when we changed the music, which is one of the reasons why music has been appropriated and used in many parts of the world that have been influenced in inner dance, the changes in the music then reroutes dopamine or increases dopamine that is sent to the striatum. And when it's sent into the striatum, the biggest types of activations normally happen. Now, I want to explain how that works. Just for now, explaining the concept. So for now, I want to ask with you, like, what is the striatum? Let's go anatomical on that. What does it look like? Where do I find it? And then does this still have something to do with the hypothalamus? In a way, it does not. In a way, it doesn't, like it does not influence the it's not influenced by the hypothalamus. It might be more something that influences the hypothalamus. It gives input to the hypothalamus more than the other way around. But there is truth as well that it's vice versa, because the hypothalamus can feed the VTA as well as the nigrostriatal pathway. Now, where's the nigrostriatal pathway? It's in the brainstem. So it's right next door to the ventral tegmental area. You remember VTA, responsible for addiction, sending out dopamine. That's responsible for the mesolimbic and the mesocortical pathway. Remember that. The amygdala plus the nucleus accumbens, which is responsible for motor function. So I want to explain to you why the body moves by its own, and it's to do with this. Now, let's look at the striatum. There's some complexity here because the striatum is actually like a group. Let's go here. So this is the subcortical region of the brain. And the striatum is actually the caudate nucleus and the putamen combined. It's this yellow and orange structure combined. And together, they basically would communicate with the putamen. And you can see it's quite close to the emotional button, and it's also close to memory. That basically, okay, let's go back to let's look at it with the other one. Let's go back to the brain. For those who will be teaching, it's quite useful to have these apps because it helps people to visualize. Okay, so all right. You don't need this. You don't need this. We talked about that. Just hide that. Go away. Don't need the cerebellum. Brainstem can go away. Now, okay, this is the striatum. It's big and fat. This is the thalamus. And okay, I didn't cover this, but this should have been important. This is a fornix, and this allowed for the conversation between the mammillary bodies. This is the hypothalamus, which is the mammillary bodies of the hypothalamus responsible for memory. This is the hippocampus. So it communicates. It doesn't actually look like this. It's a tract. I'm just going into this because I skipped it, and we're going to be talking about the fornix later on. So this is where emotions, this is emotions and memory communicates with the hypothalamus here. The hypothalamus isn't pictured here. It ends here where the axons would end. So to go back here, I just want to show you what the striatum, oops, it's hanging, it's not moving. What the striatum looks like. Okay, so it's that. This is the thalamus and the putamen. Okay, so let me go back to the screen just so we could close soon. I have a couple more things in my outline, but I think we're getting there. All right, so striatum, as we saw, is a group, and it's a combination of the caudate nucleus and the sorry, I'm lost. Actually, I'm forgetting my brain parts. Caudate nucleus and the having like amnesia. The putamen, sorry. Caudate and the putamen is the striatum and the globus. No, sorry. The putamen is a part. It's the caudate nucleus and the no, sorry. The caudate and the putamen is the striatum. The caudate nucleus and the putamen is striatum. I'm getting like a mind block. Need to stop share. Just hope if you're God. Oh my God, I forgot. I forgot what I just said. Caudate nucleus, the so okay, never mind. It's the striatum, which are basically these no, it's the globus pallidus and the caudate nucleus. No, it's the it's basically these two structures together, okay? The caudate nucleus, I'm sure it's this one, and then this is the other one. So it's these two, okay? Now, normally, this is quite complex. This is the thalamus and this is the frontal cortex. And there's a way in which, so remember the prefrontal cortex is about thinking or thought or attention. And for you to maintain your focus, there has to be like a certain circuitry that intermixes the prefrontal cortex with the striatum that then would communicate with the thalamus that would then communicate with the prefrontal cortex. So it's a kind of loop. And this kind of loop is inhibitory and stimulatory. So there would be glutamate would be a neurotransmitter that stimulates action potentials, and GABA would be the inhibitory neurotransmitter that would decrease or just stop action potentials from happening. So what's complex here is there's a whole bunch of plus and minus elements. So actually, to make this more complete, the putamen is here, and then they all communicate with each other. So as not to complicate us too much, what we're interested in is the explosion or the excitement, the stimulatory action. Let's just call it the explosion, like the atom bomb. Okay, a lot of people when they try to describe inner dance before, they would say, it was like getting hit by a truck. It was like getting hit by a truck, and a lot of that was because of the techniques in the music that was like hitting the striatum, sending dopamine from the nigrostriatal pathway to the striatum. Now, I want to explain how this works. Now, I've already explained that the brain, to maintain attention, sends out glutamate and GABA in order to maintain information flow. Now, how do you break that? You need to tap into, go back to the reticular formation. Remember, like in the brainstem here, this purple, this, I think it's more indigo, this indigo thing here. This is the substantia nigra, okay? Now, this is what is going to send out dopamine. So the reason why the pathway is called the nigrostriatal pathway is because you are about to send dopamine, not from the VTA, not from the ventral tegmental area, which is responsible for addiction. You're going to send it out from another powerful area called the substantia nigra, and it's one of the dopaminergic nuclei, like in the brain. So when you send dopamine there from the substantia nigra, and then it enters the subcortical regions and it hits the striatum. Okay, it hits the striatum. Let's say this is both the striatum. What's going to happen is it's going to be, okay, you remember the formulations earlier. It's going to be glutamate plus dopamine. This is one of the ways in which an explosion would happen. And I want to explain how or why that is explosion, why that is happening at all in the sessions. What does that have to do with the changing of the music? Okay, music change. Remember that dopamine rerouting or dopamine amplification, dopamine amplification, sometimes they use the word modulation. Dopamine can amplify the striatal activity, that when you bring dopamine there, it would lead to that explosion. And how do you reroute dopamine? It has something to do with novelty, newness. There's a reason why we are addicted to not things old, but we're always looking for new experiences. It's because dopamine then is released, like in children and in adults. So when you create an even bigger change that's almost tantamount to shock, then the amount of dopamine that you can send out will be increased exponentially. And when you already have so much glutamate being sent out from the neocortex into the striatum, so that glutamate, like lots and lots and lots, say lots and lots and lots of glutamate, and lots and lots and lots of dopamine would lead to that explosion. So that's the reason why a lot of the practices in the inner dance in the beginning that has influenced the Kundalini realms, the initial techniques was based on this formulation, that we found out that when you break expectations, dopamine gets sent out. Okay, I want to explain how this works more specifically, like the dopamine activation, let's say. I think I probably explained this already before, that when people are either expecting or not expecting, then it's either they get a reward or no reward, or they get a reward or they don't get a reward. The time when that striatal activation happens is when they're not expecting anything, and then they suddenly get gratification. They suddenly get like a pleasurable experience. When you're expecting it too much, so let's say you have people coming into your processes, your sessions, and they're expecting, even if they get what they want. And so let's say you got it to a point where your participants are always wanting the hit, they're experience seeking. They will develop a tolerance later on, so that even if their bodies are moving, they're not actually achieving a real satisfaction or joy out of the experience. It's just more the learning to anticipate. So a lot of dopamine activation is still tegmental. Like it's the VTA then that starts to send things out rather than the nigrostriatal pathway. So that's why some of the first experiences are always are usually the most incredible, because there was a level of surprise and non-anticipation that would open up the brain and the nervous system vulnerable to the process. So what does this then have to do with the hypothalamus? That sort of activity in both the substantia nigra and the VTA, there would then be connections like afferents that travel from the substantia nigra and the VTA into the hypothalamus, and that can trigger like arousal, and that can trigger stress, that can elevate just like speed and rhythm and dynamism and velocity and addiction and wanting and needing, and also just getting overwhelmed. But at the same time, it's like a high. It will make people feel high, but then when they can't maintain that, they will then like experience a kind of crash if this is your only formulation. So I feel basic trainings need to explain at least this. If it's not going to explain the oxytocin plus estrogen and so on and so forth, at least explain that. Actually, I think that's the most important. Oxytocin plus estrogen. Trust can lead to aggression. Maybe they're all important. Maybe, I don't know. But this is just to interconnect the hypothalamic action with the with the brainstem, this primitive brain. It still activates the hypothalamus. And then there would still be afferents that travel from the hypothalamus that then would guide here. And we did talk about this today, so I'm going to review it, but it will make more sense to you now. So let's go back to the hypothalamic map. I want you to familiarize yourself, even though it looks kind of complex. We had talked about the lateral hypothalamus in a previous video and the ventromedial nucleus. Let me start with this. This is wrong. I need to take this out. It's not about hunger. The ventromedial nucleus promotes satiety by sending out cortisol releasing hormone. You actually feel full. Okay. Now, the opposite of fullness is hunger. And the lateral hypothalamic nucleus, or the lateral hypothalamus, is responsible for hungry. So if you're hungry all the time, it means that you are stimulating the lateral hypothalamus. Like, so literally when they stimulate these brain parts with electricity, you can actually control if people are going to either lead themselves to obesity, to anorexia, to hyperglosia. It depends on what part you're lighting up. So I want to explain this as another holder of irony and paradox that still would be interesting for you to study like in the long term. So let me go back to the screen, and thank you for being with me all this time throughout all these interesting and weird. And where's my pen? There it is. All right, so let's clean up. We're almost done. I promise. I promise. I promise. And I'm sure some of you are like, no, keep going. Okay, so let's go back to 2 weeks ago when we talked about sleep and wake. Okay, sleep and wake. And there were some interesting things discussed there. You remember the hypothalamic flip-flop switch, whereby you can either stimulate or you can either inhibit. You can either wake someone up or you can put them to sleep. And we named those areas. The waking up would be, technically it's a tuberomammillary nucleus, but I'm just going to say the lateral hypothalamus because we don't have the time to formulate something complex right now. We're closing. The sleep area would be the ventrolateral Preoptic. Okay. And the reason why this is able to put people to sleep, if I was to explain it, it's because it can send out GABA. It can send out GABA to other brain parts in relationship with the suprachiasmatic nucleus. You remember melatonin that brings people into the dream state? It allows for sleep. Now, the lateral hypothalamus, it's just messy. Lateral hypothalamus sends out orexin. And as you well know, orexin is responsible for hunger. So if you want to, let's say you've been fasting a long time, you would have high orexin levels and you would probably be hungrier than usual. And the lateral hypothalamus then would communicate with the real weaker upper part of the brain. It's the tuberomammillary nucleus, and it's responsible for sending out histamine. So you remember we talked about if you took antihistamine drugs, you would feel sleepy. You want people to wake up, like in the sessions, the journeys, even as you're putting them to sleep, you need to raise histamine levels. You raise histamine levels, you will experience insomnia. Have too much orexin, otherwise called hypocretin, you will not be able to sleep. You will be insomniac. And that has to do with hunger. So I just want to point out that there is a place in the hypothalamus that is responsible for wakefulness and hunger. And there is a part of the hypothalamus that is responsible for no, that's the wrong spell. Lateral. Lateral. Anyway. Okay, lateral. So that's responsible for sleep. Okay, so let's correct this though. What we're really wanting to talk about now is the ventromedial hypothalamus. Now, the ventromedial hypothalamus is responsible for what is called satiety. For those who don't know what satiety means, it means like I am full. I am not lacking food. I'm not lacking anything. I'm actually okay. I'm satiated. I am satisfied. So the VM or VMH is responsible for satiety. And the lateral hypothalamus is responsible for hunger and wakefulness. Now, if you do the math, what you would normally think about is probably because this is more in the wake side of things, and because it's also more integrated with the posterior hypothalamus, it's more related to the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, right? Then the ventromedial nucleus being a satiety center, you would normally think that this ought to be more related with the parasympathetic nervous system, which is in the anterior hypothalamus. But there's something strange there where recently scientists have been doing more research on the wait on the ventromedial hypothalamus. And what they're finding out is when you stimulate the ventral medial hypothalamus with electricity, then it actually starts to trigger some deep fear responses that even transcend those of the amygdala. So we're realizing that the VMH could in fact be the fear center of the brain. And you move even a little bit within the ventral medial hypothalamus, you then start to trigger aggression. Like a lot of aggression, a lot of anger starts to come out. And this is mostly still with the animals that when you light up that part of the brain, like a rat or a mouse or a vole would like bite like another animal. And as soon as you stop lighting it, they would just mind their own business. So I'm just going to put this out there that there's some complexity and weirdness and bizarreness and contradictions here, so that I would like you to just observe and be very awake in how you conduct your activations. That I would like you to be interested, to be excited, to be amazed, to be but at the same time, we are bringing greater consciousness to what we're doing. And having spoken these, I'm sure a lot of you would probably start to realize like a lot of things to do with, experiences, not just inside the journey, but what was happening in the days after, the hours after, like during the evening, the next day, the next week, where there's certain emotions, where there's certain like energies there, physiological, emotional, autonomic, that you just couldn't explain. Like try as you might, wanting it to all just be love, 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 light, light, light. There are often like difficult moments in the process. And the reason why we're studying is we want to understand what would be the most balanced ways that could improve upon the ways like we have been held, because we're all learning, and a lot of these findings are quite recent. Even in the inner dance, these are all new. Like what we're speaking about, these have not been handled in any of the trainings before. We've touched upon many things separate from each other, but it's really only now that we're able to make this share this with coherence and connections. We like to throw a lot of things out there, but we needed the space, like the one whole year, to finally have the time to be able to talk about these. I don't think it's possible to arrive at real, like intelligent or aware techniques regards music, touch, words, and anything else that would be a part of your repertoire without having the actual structural understanding of what's happening. Like what are you activating? What are you triggering? And what is homeostasis? I don't feel we need to perfect our understanding of this. I just feel that we need to vocabularize the energy that is you with what is there, not to cancel it out, not to destroy even, because when you lesion certain parts of the brain, you never know what's going to come up. There are irregularities in personality, judgment, social judgment, that you never know what might happen, because when you do lesion certain parts of the brain, you can take the kindest person and you can create a shift. And this isn't just energy work. It could be motherhood, fatherhood. It could be like adolescence, puberty. It could be menopause. It could be diet. It could be like many things. And so I'm happy that inner dance can actually provide some kind of mapping as you understand it now, like, okay, a neurology and endocrinology, psychology, for healers and change agents, like being given like a lot of power. So I'm going to open the space. I'm sure a lot of you have a bunch of questions, a bunch of observations, insights. I hope this is interesting. I really enjoyed preparing for this, but I really had to put in the hours to make this work. And my mind's, I like to use the word spaghetti. I've been spaghettied out by this particular call, but I wanted to make sure that I would be able to bridge the connection. So questions, observations, insights. I would love actually the latter more than the questions as well. What are you picking up, Oscar?
Yeah, thank you so much. It has been a very not challenging. I think that is just things that is not possible grabbing in a calling and seeing you in one hand dealing with this and understanding the management, energy conservation in years invested on it is amazing and is inspiring. Thank you so much, firstly. Secondly, this is giving me a lot of inputs about how different how we have many analog controls in the session through different ways to behave, through different handles, how words and predispositions, they are creating these regions, this activation in regions that after, when the music and the process starts, we can already presetting the session without the session starting, just knowing all these details, how all these presets are already there, how we can, because this is power, knowing where is the yes, the analog controls is power. In understanding how different variations and diversity and the beat, the time beating and all these details and putting all this in context is very inspiring. I just have an immense gratitude because I'm also walking one step forward in the process of understanding more clearly what before I was doing without not knowing all the things. And I feel that bringing this capacity to the observer that is forming, because if the observer is participating with this consciousness, the observation is already power and is already activation. The observer is already the touching. It's not touching exactly with the hands, it's observing and waking up all these spaces and dynamics that the body and consciousness is able to flow with the type of the type of dynamic or style of holding space that each person has, and how everyone can create interesting and different dynamics to their own unique style. So I feel very inspired through this, and thank you so much, Pai. It was amazing.
Yeah, totally. Like I think what these calls can do for us is it can help us improve the tools that we're already using. Because a lot of people, they already have the diversity of certain instrumentations, verbal cues, perceptions, but it can also help us to add more to our toolkits, whether it be, okay, my music is a little bit like edgy and like pushing people off the off the cliff. But beyond music, there are so many things that maybe we have not thought about that could be part of the mix. The more we take in, the more we structure. So thank you, Oscar. Okay, what's your
Something else, the thing for me is not just about what is happening in the session with the music in the touching, is was the pre-space that we are setting for just knowing, observing, and stand up outside of the usual facilitator style. For me, this is the most important point that I added to me. And yes, I just want to make it noticeably clear. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. We would understand that it's the system itself facilitating. It's not even the person, right? It's like the body is so incredible, so wise. And I want to see energy people also embody it. Okay, thank you. Let's hear from all of you, some of you. We have, 30 minutes, but you can extend because it's quite a big topic set.
Hi, hi, how are you? Thank you so
Habiba.
much. I'm sorry, it's still a bit dark here. I just wanted to reflect on something you mentioned about touching. Can you hear me well?
Yes, you can hear you more or less. I think it could be louder if you could come closer to the mic. Or you could just speak louder. I think you're not wanting to wake up people in the house, maybe, I don't know. But we can hear you.
Uh, okay, can you hear me now? I don't want to wake up people. Okay, you mentioned something about stopping touching on the stop, and I remember ever since I started the emergent, um, I went pro touching people in general. I would always do my best understand more about where to touch people and where not to touch people. And why you mentioned that the power of the stomach, and then it can be risky to touch people on the stomach.
Okay, thank you. Let me retract or adjust some of the things that I said. So I don't want to be misinterpreted as well. I don't want to just put it out there that certain things are dangerous. I would say too much of too much repetitions of certain areas could lead to imbalances for sure. So I think what a lot of people have been doing because of the excitement and the newness and the need, it could be like a need for validation, a need for something to happen, then the intuition has really led people to really touch, not just to touch, but to press, to press too much on the activating or excitatory areas that then would signal um, more sympathetic nervous system energies rather than parasympathetic elements. So I think it's really just adapting to more inhibitory elements. Like for me, back of the head, lower regions, like from the hips down. But really, like a lot of people would go to the chest quite fast because heart rate increasing then would influence adrenal release. And already, if there were oxytocin levels starting the uterine contractions, then when you keep adding innervations within the thoracolumbar region, okay, the fight or flight would be increase heart rate, do something to the breathing pattern so that oxygenation then leads to greater heart rate, even releasing the what is happening, releasing hormones and neurotransmitters that would just like stimulate the cranial and sacral region would be more the parasympathetic elements. So I would touch certain elements in the head. I wouldn't forget that. I would sometimes work more with proprioception rather than touch. Touch is tactician. Proprioception would be merely positioning the body and then leaving them. Already would change the experience. Like changing the direction of the head would affect the hippocampus because of the head direction cells that then would affect the entorhinal cortex. It's like moving the head a little bit would change the scenery. Now, I use verbal cues a lot more than touch. I would ask certain questions like, what is time? In the past, they were more confrontational questions like, what are you afraid of? What is your deepest fear? And that would then lead to a palpitation. But I like more the cosmic experiences, not because the more sometimes you activate the sympathetic, the experiences tend to be quite personalizing. They re-traumatize themselves. They go back to the same emotion. And then that could create certain loops. And then the loop then could lead to an addiction. And sometimes it becomes harder to break free when, let's say, the prefrontal cortex or the other association areas of the brain are unable to hold insight. If we were to maybe tend towards insight a lot more, then definitely touch is just the opening. Touch within the sequence belongs. Like touch plays an important part because it can deepen the process whereby there might be still some inhibition or stuckness. But yeah, there's always almost like too much conversations in the beginning in many groups who are already studying, like, but you can see that they were watching the people holding the space, they were copy pasting, they're also basing it on how they experienced it. And when that meets with the insecurities early facilitators sometimes have, which is coming from low self-esteem, like, am I worth do I have enough self-worth to do this? Am I powerful enough? Am I good enough? And when they're dealing with those emotions, there tends to be this trying hard, not really needing to understand the structure, to be more intentional. Like, I want to give more because I'm asking for money, people are paying, There are expectations. I want to create like this popular practice. So in the event where they're pushing more, that would manifest in running around the space like a mad person, like trying to touch as many bodies as possible, to try to create like an effect, some kind of emotional outburst, then would reveal to the group and to the facilitator something's happening. I'm being validated. People who have been doing it for much longer, they tend to not need the validation because they've seen it so many times already, and they realize that I can just let people be. I can just really let people go deep into the cosmos. So touch is it triggers the limbic and the autonomic nervous system. Again, it triggers emotional structures. It triggers body-based structures. But for integration regards insight, cognition, wisdom, there are other like tools to do with that. Like the most powerful emotional pathways would be touch usually and smell. Okay, the olfactory bulb has a direct circuit with the amygdala, along with the and the hypothalamus. Okay, amygdala, which is emotions, and smell. Smell goes straight to the hypothalamus. It can go straight to the septal region. It can go straight to the hippocampus. It doesn't need to pass through the thalamus like the others, like sound, light. They need to pass through the policeman or the gating hub. Smell would probably be the most emotional button next to or alongside touch. Now, what happens in the brain when it tries to develop insight? You know what insight is? It's like I'm walking away from this and I have some understanding. Too much activation would lead to just an experience of energy, but it usually doesn't arrive at an understanding. Here's how an understanding would come about. Okay, let's do this one last looking at the body kind of thing. Let's look for a neocortex. Don't know if pen is it seems to be lost. Oh no, it's just there. It's hanging in my iPad. Okay, so this is how insight occurs. So you have these regions of the brain, like this is the parietal lobe, parietal, which is where position and sensations happen or are mapped out. This is the occipital, occipital. This is the frontal lobe, and this is the temporal lobe. So they all have different functions. The temporal lobe is auditory, it's also emotional, it's also to do with memory. This is to do with vision, and then this is to do with like senses, including temperature and pain and pleasure. And this has to do with motor. If the body is moving, it also has to do with like attention. Of course, there would be complexity here, but what I want to explain here is, okay, we're thinking of insight, and what is already interesting is sight is insight. So to develop insight, it's not really just to activate the occipital, the occipital region of the brain, which is in the back. What you want to happen is there are certain areas of the brain, like for here, for instance, this is called the posterior association area. So let's focus on the word association. Association. Association here means this is where images and sensations and sounds, could be the spoken word, it could be like pictures, shapes, sizes, and then body movement. This is where they all meet. Okay, motoric, sensory motor, like vision, audition. They would meet in areas like the posterior association area. There would be like frontal lobe association areas as well. So how do we develop this? This became possible in humans, particularly through language, and especially like written language. When you learn to read and to write, you had to bring vision, audition, sensation, and like all of these knowledge or wisdom elements, you had to associate them together. Now, when we do the work that we do, I'm going to get to your question soon. When we do the work that we do, there's a lot of attention given to the body moving on its own because we're activating the primary. Let's say this is the central sulcus, and then this is the primary motor cortex. So this is what we're activating when the body is moving. Now, when you talk about touch, where is that mapped out? It's in the postcentral gyrus. Would be the primary somatosensory cortex. Okay, sensation. When you touch people, you activate these. Okay, so the body is moving, and you're touching. You're feeling loved and held, and that might activate the temporal lobe, which is about emotion, memory, and feeling. But often when it's too motoric, or if it's too, you see here that the motor function and the sense function are beside each other, separated only by the central sulcus. You can actually inhibit the activation of the occipital lobe, and that's why too much of the kundalini kind of thing, and too much of certain elements with a lack of insightful support, people don't end up lighting up the occipital lobe. So what we're doing is we're actually destroying parts of the brain that were developed in childhood that's meant for not destroying but inhibiting it temporarily. So if you want people to walk away with knowledge or insight, yeah, you can use touch. Touch is amazing. Touch is beautiful because people are looking for that. But then you would let go at a certain point, and often that's when visions would occur. Usually when people are in a touch-based environment, there's too much of the social dynamic. And there's a lot of personalities that have this tendency to go into dependency and reliance on either a healer or someone to hold them. And when that happens, that is the reason why there are certain parts of the brain that aren't so like active, because we're going more in the somatosensory and we're going into motoric elements. I mean, a lot of motor elements are in fact linked to vision, but this is one way of helping you to understand like balance, that even closeness, let's say closeness will heighten oxytocin levels. And I just talked about if oxytocin is not handled in a balanced way, it becomes too much, and it either creates over dependency, hypersexuality, or it could lead to like aggression. So to balance that, like you would then bring about the opposite of sociality. It would be like independence, so that the possible dependency mechanisms that sessions could bring, over dependency, over reliance, the healer, the teacher, the guru, and so on and so forth. To balance that out, you need to leave them alone. And then if there's intensity of all sorts of stimulations are happening, that's when people start to in the rest periods associate or integrate. The word is actually really more like integrate. How do you integrate? So there's nothing wrong with touch. There's nothing wrong with the body moving. It's just more mixing that up with other manifestations, tools, and whatnot. Hope this helps. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, it does. I have just one more question.
Mhm.
You said to leave them alone. I remember in certain sessions when, like, okay, I'm using my voice as in I'm singing, there's music, someone is moving, I feel the need to go and touch this person or just be near them, and they start having a catharsis. Um, would that be a good time to keep on touching them, or would that be the time to just be around them and then
Mm.
let them have their own journey?
I think if it's something new to the person, it's okay. It's more okay to keep with them in order for them to achieve a breakthrough, because to not be with them, to not give them support when it's their first time to jump over the edge, they actually were able to do it because of your presence, because you were able to provide enough safety and context, right? Enough heart and enough mind. Like, why am I here? What am I doing here? Am I safe? They were able to connect through the space that you created. So holding that space in the beginning is really important, because you took them there, and it should continue. But I think if there's too much repetition, then that's where the leaving alone might be important, just to then allow them to use their own personal resources. I mean, really, the reason why we are sharing this is to free up space holders, because in observation, there are a lot of healers who really get trapped by doing too much. And it really frees you up when expectations are lowered, yet there's actually more happening there. You're not running around. You're not also making yourself needed. You're giving them independence is the greatest gift you can ever give another soul, is what we like to say. And that we don't heal anyone, we create the conditions where healing happens on its own. And that should not stay within the journey space. That should, happen all throughout life already. So thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, others.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay. So, for me, there has been that whole shift from where my journey started to being at Maya to now integrating it all. And it's all not just making sense. It's really so much inspiration to actually even, I mean, I'll go on a personal level to my background of education in Montessori, which is observing, and how you get as much, actually more joy by observing what their body is doing than you feeling that you are that person making that happen. And when you finally actually do break yourself free from that, the satisfaction and, for me, the love of the space has grown at such a level that I'm still carrying it through each session and the next session. And I want to tell you, Pi, because obviously you've seen my journey. Like, I can actually say I finally get it with clarity, and it's very exciting. And I will be that space holder for those situations that I'm called upon to just support, even when it's not my session. And I'm just very, despite of all the vocabulary and the anatomy, and of course I love it when you say, y'all remember, like someday we will get how you have the memory to hold all these terminologies, but it's making more sense. And for me, at least, it's less fearful every time to hear these terminologies and more interested. So thank you for the inspiration, and thank you all for holding this space.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anyone else? The Singaporeans seem to have run out of questions. We have someone who's related to Singaporean group, Rami. She's in
Yeah.
Japan.
Yeah. I'm not in Japan, I'm in Singapore, but I am from Japan. Anyway, oh yeah, thank you for this amazing class. I'm just so much having so much fun. Um, Lots of people are seeking spiritual enlightenment or awakening, I guess, and I was one of them as well. I've been seeking to get there. And it kind of stopped when I experienced the body movement, or in your word, explosion. Which was happening. It started to happen like a few years back. Um, and that was because of the meditation and all the things. And I thought it's a mystic thing. That's why I started to research scientific function of why it's happening, why I'm doing the breach things, and why I'm seeing the visions and all this stuff and the moving body in the meditation, and I'm getting the answer at the moment. But when people are seeking the enlightenment, um, would you say, would you explain the enlightenment with satiety, or was the word satiety, and the hypothalamus
Mm,
things kind of like
mm,
relating each other, or how would you explain spiritual enlightenment into this
okay.
um brain science,
o-
science or neuroscience things?
Okay. It's a beautiful question. I wouldn't have the entire formulation, but there is something there. So let's say, talking about satiety. Okay, the lateral hypothalamus, as we remember, is about hunger, right? And then the ventromedial handles satiety. And we made this weird by understanding that aggression is hiding in the satiety center. Now, I want to connect this with, I wasn't able to do so, but this existed in another call, that there aren't that many inputs to you remember the VTA? This is what sends out dopamine, and a lot of people, they start to anticipate things when dopamine is sent to some of these centers. Now, one of the inputs to the VTA is actually the lateral hypothalamus, and I was giving a warning some Zoom calls ago that one of the reasons why we are so dopaminized and addicted is because what is triggering the ventral tegmental area is like the same part of the brain that's always hungry. It's always hungry. And I think in the spiritual awakening, the problem there is because the lateral hypothalamus being histamaturgic, it elevates histamine, it also elevates glutamate, dopamine, it will give the high. So the problem right now is people don't know how to define the spiritual awakening. Is the spiritual awakening supposed to be meditative? So let's say if we say satiety is satisfaction, relaxation, rest. I would say it's not just a VMH, it's the VMH probably with the posterior hypothalamus, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is when you activate the vagus nerve, the restive parts of the nervous system, then the thing with satiety is I I don't need anything anymore, which is almost like a Buddhist state. So I think the way people describe the awakening has some confusion. If you define, okay, what happens if you lesion or destroy the ventral medial hypothalamus? That means that the satiety center will dysfunction, and this would lead to this is kind of obvious. You're going to eat all the time because you're never full. Maybe you ate enough already, but then you just keep eating and eating and eating and eating and eating because you're not receiving the necessary signals that allow you to slow down. And this has something to do with leptin, with like insulin. It's still other parts of the body sending signals. But when this is lesioned or destroyed, then I would believe that a lot of people in spiritual circles are probably lesioning their ventral medial hypothalamus. And so they're not actually feeling full. And they will just keep going back to the journeys like, I want more, I want more, I want more. So we need to light this up for sure, because I think we're lighting this up. I think the two definitions on a basic level and how people understand spirituality would be, okay, to bring up, let's say, like Buddha is quite present there in Singapore and in Japan and in India and China. And then here, spiritual awakening would have to do more with the tantric pathway, which is not really to go into energy conservation. It's to go into energy consumption. It's not just to have sex with other people. It's to have sex with the world, to have sex with food, to have sex with anything that's gonna trigger another dopaminergic response. I'm not going to celebrate just Buddha, and I do believe that there's a lot of neo-Buddhism happening in the world. And I'm not just going to celebrate Tantra. Where inner dance is in all of these, we're somewhere in between. This is partly confusing and partly illuminating. So I think a lot of these expressions will be determined by the nature of the facilitator himself or herself. Are you full? And understanding that the lateral hypothalamus is driven by the opposite of fullness. It's like lack. I don't have enough. That is why we are watching organizers of spiritual modalities where there's like hunger there. It's like they're earning so much already and then they just don't stop. It's like, I need more, I need more, I need more. The issue here is the design of the process will be determined by where people's bodies, spirits, brains are at. And because there are chemical imbalances that have been at work even since we were children, it's very rare that we have been balanced. That's why then the problem I think with the spiritual circles is there's too much seeking, right? It's like I'm always like looking for enlightenment. If you're looking for it, you're never gonna have it. And that meeting with the spiritual industry, because there's so much money to be made by selling air. Spirituality as a business model is so quick and fast and big for a lot of people because you don't need to invest, you don't need overhead. You're selling air, you're selling energy, and people are getting the high. The actual product is dopamine. I think it's because we got hit by the time in our evolution on Earth, and I'm not going to blame the work that we do, like studio-based westernized yoga studios. Like that got economically viable, and then people just need to take teacher trainings, and then there was a breath work and so on and so forth. So when people got hit by the neurotransmitters, I can't be more weirded out by this because I discovered this by going into sheer simplicity. By living alone, living in coconuts without other people, I experience oneness. But when people experience inner dance as a workshop, they can't separate the high from like a lot of the other things that are going on where I need to make more money, I need to pay for rent, I have kids, and I'm so stressed out. It's going to take a while for a lot of those to settle. And because there are a lot of benefits from firing things up, because the world is closed, we need to just trust it. But the real ideal would be the slowing down mechanisms. I think the question we really need to ask, whether it's audible in words or not, like, are you okay already? Do you have everything you need inside? Are you simple? If we just get people wanting, like the exact terminology in the work that we do related to the issue you're bringing about is experience seeking and the need for validation. People can't seem to easily come to grips with, I am enough already. I have the answers inside. They're always looking for signs and more energy, repeating the same things. It's experience seeking that's hounding us, I think. Thank you for putting this out because you've been through it, and now maybe you're seeing science and spirit can work together because the insights in science are quite hard. You can't escape. Because we can bliss out, but then we also know the crash. It allows for objectivity. So I think we need to be both.
So then one more question related to that one. Like with people taking DMT or any other like a chemical things to experience that oneness, right? And then it's DMT is from the pineal gland, and the relationship between pineal gland and this hypothalamus
Mm.
is like that. Of course, they're connecting, right?
Yeah, because
So the DMT thing is.
what controls the pineal gland is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that's still in the hypothalamus, right?
So it's in it.
Yes, the dream
And
molecule is still needing to be rhythmicized, or it has something to do with the rhythm of the circadian cycle.
so I kind of understood that the DMT is just one-time oneness experience, is like exploding and like shooting rockets, but the satiety is more like constant. That I don't need. I have enough. I am enough. That kind of a state of the satisfaction rather than just one-time DMT
Yeah.
thing. Is that make sense?
The way I would approach this is that a lot of humans, because of the repression, cognitive dissonance, problems with family, with culture, with money, there are a lot of things unexpressed in the body. So there seems to be in many people a necessary stage where they have to explode and let go, because there's a dishonesty and a disconnect. But almost where you're speaking from is when you let it out, something does settle. So that there are possible strong facilitators who would be in the space holding, but they seem like unaffected. Like ever since I began, I never really I was never in the same intense space as the participants, because I'd already lived out my catharsis. I would really just be there relaxed. In Singapore, in Malaysia, people are screaming their ass off, and like I'm getting deaf from all the loudness, yet I'm actually just there, like walking super slow, relaxed. So there is something inside me that's satiated, and I probably work with neurotransmitters just to be able to operate more efficiently in the day rather than to destroy an old structure that I'm not happy with. In Singapore, in Japan, this needs to be understood because of the level of commerciality and materialism and stress, where
Yes,
most people,
probably.
they buy happiness.
Well, in Japan, it's changing though. They're coming back to who they are, and very organic. And yeah, because they noticed that after the bubble,
Mm.
right? So they got like a coming back state.
It's because they had it
But
early. Like for countries like China, that's quite new in the industrial game. And people have this innate hunger because of communism and overpopulation. Japan isn't there because they've already had it. Usually in Western countries where people have had access to resources, they're the ones who come closer to satiety as a stage. But like, let's say Indians or what have you, who've only tasted the internet, certain types of resources, they're still excited to consume or to level out. I'm not talking about spiritual India, but more, like
natural.
yeah.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's over. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so
Amazing.
much.
Thank you. Okay, Trudy.
Hi, Pai. Thank you for these sessions. They're actually very stimulating. So dense, the amount of info. So I'm still sort of like absorbing whatever. And I'm very, very new in this journey. So at least from a facilitation point of view, I may be asking questions that are actually very nascent. Couple of things. One is where it comes to music, right? Because you're facilitating a group and you're using music which I think you can effect from time to time with noise and all that. But it's generally you will have something in the background. There's so much you can do to affect it. People respond to music differently. So like a piece of music that can create catharsis in one may not create the same effect for another person because of their own culture, their own beliefs, their own whatever it is, right? So if let's say somebody in the room is cathartic and cathartic for a very long time, so as a facilitator, right? What do? Do you allow this to happen? Because if you switch the music, then it will also have a, or if you do something with the music, it would affect this person but everything else in the room. And then, so how long do you allow catharsis to, or do you let catharsis carry on? Because you don't know where the limit of the person is, right?
Yeah.
And if this catharsis goes on and it becomes aggressive, more and more aggressive, how would one handle it as a facilitator?
Okay.
And how long can it go on for?
I'll be direct about it. Like I normally don't encourage lengthy catharsis, but I'm not going to stop it. So what control you have is usually in the music because the music has the most suggestible emotional elements, non-linear, non-verbal. So let's say you change the music and there's still cathartic. Don't know if that's a word. And then that might have affected the others or not. You don't have control over their response mechanisms to the change that you brought about. So you would need to let go. This is what we're going to cover later on in the month when we talk about old and new ways of playlisting. So as for all of you to develop tools, and playlisting is not just about music. I think the deeper question here that would be more sustainable and insightful is how do you design a journey? Okay. Now, a journey could be personal, emotional, it could be historicist, it could be epic proportions, it could be dreamlike, it could be fantasy, it could be religious. It all depends on what you do, like how you handle the space. So there, what is common in the journey process is there's a limit, there's a limitation, there's a container. It's an hour or 90 minutes or shorter. Then the nature of the journey will actually depend on many conditions. One of which would be your because we're talking about, let's say, control. Like, what control do I have? Now you're saying, okay, there's so many people there and some of them might get affected by this or not. List down all the possible conditions you can. Like it will depend on what they had for lunch, what what their mom told them the night before. Those who usually got triggered by crisis are the ones who are most affected. So you don't have control over those things. The banker, the mother, the teenager, they all walk into the door. You have to let go, but you do have control over your own intention, and it's technically the tools. If you have a diversity of tools, that would also help to determine, because usually when you're channeling the space, whether it be consciously or subconsciously, let's say you're not thinking, but at the same time you have the themes that you're observing. Okay, I'm working with a certain audience type. It's like corporate, schools, it's children, it's mostly this gender, that age group, whatever the demographics and the psychographics. Knowing that, that will influence maybe the notes that you are putting down in your notebook prior to you showing up in the space. It's really important that you have what's called the gist, or the common sense. What's the general picture that's here? Because you will contain them as you yourself need to be contained. But within the parameters that you have, say you give the opening talk, that's going to influence. What we are going to study that has more complexity in terms of the practice would be like the tools. Like when you're there in the hour and then you're channeling, right? Okay, I have this theme that's coming up and I can feel it, but there's like a lack where you didn't prepare enough, because let's say your song list is too monochromatic, it's too much of a certain type of emotion, and you're like, I need now to inhibit this. Need something GABAergic. I need more slow wave sleep. and need more integration, not like heart pumping, activation, crying. That's where any relevant or interesting, essential, provocative aspect of the human, if you have a conjunct, a specific trigger mechanism to meet that, it could be something trusting, something loving, something angry. That's just talking about emotion, but there could be a whole other list of places that you would like people to enter into that belongs to the cosmic human. Then just giving you a chance to grow, to organize your interests so that this should help the facilitator to evolve, not just the participant. That all the observations and the feedbacks you receive, you need to be able then to pull out rabbits from the hat that you're seeing. Okay, that's interesting. I haven't thought of that. Like, let me think of that. So like one common mistake people make is they get stuck with Western music, usually upbeat, and then they forget that, oh, what about Western African music, or what about Balinese gamelan music or Chinese music? What would that actually do? Whatever their nationality, they all bear historicities. So capacity for growth for a facilitator would mean, number one, organizing your before you get your tools, you need a toolbox. You can't just have your tools laying around. You need good containers so that when you keep adding to those toolboxes, adding tools to the toolbox, you don't get lost. So we're going to be talking more about that maybe later on this month.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I think space for growth, that you don't get stuck with the same techniques 3 years later if you start in the same way. Because a lot of people, they really just listen to the trainer, they get the songs, they listing down, but they're not changing. We want you guys to be able to evolve accordingly as you yourself receive feedbacks. Okay. Thank you, Trudy.
Thank you.
Jeremy.
Yeah, so I think to add on to Trudy's question as well. So I think I had some feedback before where some of the participants said, oh, I didn't resonate with the song, therefore I felt I couldn't fall into it. Right. And I think the question in my head is, are we supposed to play songs that can resonate? Because that's the basis of the whole practice, right? To create safety, and resonance can only come if there's safety can only come if there's resonance as well. But yet at the same time, if we play songs that are too familiar, it gets them caught in the same old loop. So I'm trying to think about what that process looks like. How do we create some level of familiarity enough so that we can break them all of it, so that they can expand into insight, integration, whatsoever?
Okay, beautiful. So familiarity would be oxytocin, trust, right? But understanding the role dopamine holds, right? The nigrostriatal pathway where it would explode, where you need novelty. Novelty is the opposite of familiarity. So you need to shock them as they also feel safe. And when you think about that, those are two opposing things. But obviously what comes first is you can't shock them right away. You need to make them safe. And then when you know it's the right time, you shock them. So what we will be studying in music is not just a genre, or when some, you know what? We should just keep talking about this in listening, that when some people get triggered by a song, not in a good way, it just gets them stuck. They get like annoyed. Certain feedbacks would be the music just didn't work. It doesn't bring people into conscious trance. Number two, a lot of people are actually smart. They don't like being manipulated. And certain songs are very coercive. And in the long term, they will not appreciate that. So there are many instances where facilitators are experimenting with less manipulative music that would allow the energy to rise up from inside. This is still a category mistake in many, that what inner dance really started was the activation levels that could spread out so that all these other modalities could work on what had already been instituted, because there were activated bodies. And usually when people talk to each other, it can just keep spreading. But another style is really needed that's not so activating. And I think if we use those, you're teaching people to activate themselves. It's always the case, right? Am I going to activate them or are they going to activate themselves? I would look for a space in between. There are gifts in being activated because of the level of confrontation people can have with the sympathetic nervous system. They can look at their fear, and that's usually coming from face to face. That demands a sociality, but in the independence field, they should be able to learn to activate like themselves. So I don't want you, Jeremy, to suddenly try to look for really evocative, activating music, because then that would maybe shift you too fast into the manipulative element, which could be good or bad. Like I'm still giving you just vocabulary elements for you to think about this long term. Don't be influenced too much by certain people's needs and wants as well. That would be a big trap. Don't get imprisoned by people wanting experiences. Show them things that they've never even considered.
Yeah, I think you worded the dilemma in my head, right? Like, oh, how much of it is me and how much of it is their responsibility for not being able to trust and surrender as well. Which comes back to the question, right? Like, how as facilitators can we create that safely even right from the start before they even enter into the whole process, such that that resonance can be established as early as possible as well. So yeah.
And I think the space that really allows that to happen is in the self. Like I really touched people, and I recognized the part of myself when I started this work that really needed to become a healer, that really wanted to help people, because it belongs in my culture. You know, Filipinos, between us, we're touchy-feely. We like to really, there's like a lot of massage, there's a lot of body work, there's a lot of touch. It's very emotional. So because inner dance came from the Philippines, it actually freed up a lot of cultures to be able to touch people when touch is not allowed. Like in the Middle East, people aren't allowed to touch each other. Many parts of Europe, people are not allowed to go near each other. This is my personal space. This is, we're supposed to be separate. So a huge gift inner dance did give was connection. But I think it was like a pendulum. It really just swung because of the sheer need people had for touch, because it was lacking in many places. In Singapore, there's a lot of touch, but there's also a lot of distance. They're so close to each other in the MRTs, but they're so protective of their own space because there's not the space. So there's no answer to this. It's really meant to be asked and to be observed, and that already brings solutions just to hold it out there. There's no answer. It's a paradigm shifting. Okay, so I guess we will close. I thank you for the feedback that this is good. I'm sometimes like wondering, should I do this? Should I really give this mapping? Is it going to be complete, or am I going to oversimplify? I'm going to hide like the notes because I'm not going to insult people. I'm not going to state that people don't have the ability. I think this is how we would do it. Either I can work with the doctors now and wait for them to have a spiritual awakening, or this is medicine. It's real medicine. This is going to heal. And I'm really glad that you give this feedback. It encourages me to just keep going, and that I can see you guys able to handle the same material when you're helping others later on. So we have another call on Thursday. I don't know if it's going to look almost exactly like this one, because the topics are quite important for this. Then we might repeat, but it might always be different. This is more for the European, some American, other parts of the world schedules. This is the biggest group we've had so far in the Wednesday call. This is usually not as populated because of time zones. So thank you for being here. And we keep in touch. If you can unmute yourself and help me to close. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias. Buenas
you.
noches.
Gracias. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Jeremy.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Mm.
Noche.
Oscarín.